This one, not such a big night in terms of there being so much on the ballot, but it's sort of like we're getting, it's almost like preseason in some ways.
Right.
We're kind of getting things rolling toward what is going to be a huge political year in Wisconsin.
Yeah, we were just talking about how none of us had anything to vote for today, right? So maybe you're watching, maybe you didn't have anything on your ballot, but this is still the setup for some huge decisions you'll make. And as we get more local, as we talk about those races that might seem, quote, small, as Jason often points out in the stories that he does, it's your money. This is the stuff that probably affects you the most, your family. So as we get hyper local here, I think that's the benefit of how we cover things at Fox 6, and that's what we're going to dive into tonight.
And those issues that matter the most to you and your families. And one thing I want to say right off the bat here is that if you're worried, I missed the primary, well, you still have time. Polls are open until 8 tonight. But also, a lot of us, all three of us up here, didn't have a primary in our jurisdiction. So some of you might not have primaries at all. If you live in the city of Milwaukee, you definitely had at least one primary for mayor, maybe also for your common council member. But we're also talking about local races. So if you're thinking, this is the primary, what about presidential? Hold on, that's not going to come until April. So hold on, we still have a presidential primary in Wisconsin, but that's coming up in April.
And the presidential primaries across the country are happening in rapid succession. Super Tuesday coming up, obviously, very soon, March 5th. We in Wisconsin are kind of way down the list when it comes to presidential primaries. April 2nd, and it's toward the end, frankly. I think things are going to be pretty well decided by the time we get to that, most likely. But obviously, there's so much more to come here in Wisconsin because after all the primaries are done, obviously, the Republican National Convention will be right here in Milwaukee, and then, of course, the Democratic Convention right down the road in Chicago. So there is a lot to come politically here. I mean, this is where the eyes of the nation will be, this part of the country, obviously, for the next many months.
And it really shows, having Chicago and Milwaukee hosting the two national political conventions just shows how crucial this Midwest region is when you think about Michigan, Wisconsin, Ohio, Pennsylvania. I mean, this whole area here is going to be crucial for winning the White House. And when it comes down to it, Wisconsin is considered one of a few toss-up states. So when you talk to the political forecasters whose job it is to sort of look at the numbers and crunch those numbers and figure out where the battlegrounds are, Wisconsin is always on the top of the top 4 in the country for where the quote-unquote toss-up states are for both the president, so the road to the White House to say runs through Wisconsin, but also for the U.S. Senate as well. And we have Tammy Baldwin, the Democrat, facing off against some Republican. We don't know who, but today at least one Republican's jumping in tonight here in Madison.
My husband jokes that, excuse me, apparently I'm not allowed to live in politically unimportant states because I was born in New Hampshire. My first job was in Ohio. And then I went to Pennsylvania, and now I'm here in Wisconsin. So there's always been that political
battleground
hype.
Amanda.
Well, that's also what my husband calls me. So,
nothing to do with politics.
But Jason, you're the resident political nerd, so I am interested in hearing what you are looking out for tonight and what you're most excited about.
I think the biggest thing on my mind right now is Kenosha. You know, Kenosha has had only 2 mayors since 1992, so to put that in perspective, the person that was in the White House, the president at that time, was President George H.W. Bush. That's how long ago. They've only had 2 mayors since that time. And tonight they are having a wide open primary, 9 people running to replace outgoing Mayor John Antarabian, who's not seeking re-election this time. He's been in office for 24 years. He started in 1992 and then took a little break, came back in 2016, but he's saying no more to Kenosha mayor. And so tonight there's 9 people running, and you've got members of the Common Council, you've got community activists, you've got community leaders. They're really seeing this as an opportunity, right? These big position, these mayors in these Wisconsin cities, often once elected, they get to kind of keep their job for a very long time. You could say mayor for life for some of these folks, like Tom Barrett, right? He was mayor for a long time as well here in Milwaukee. And tonight, Kenosha is going to whittle down the crowd. There's 9 running in this primary. The top 2 vote getters will then move on to the April general election.
And you talked to voters about that. You did a story about that. Mm-hmm. So if we can, Sarah, are we able to play that?
Yep, we'll pull it up here.
So yeah, we went to Kenosha. We talked with voters about exactly what the issues were that were pressing for them, and the fact that, how do you even make up a determination when you see a list of 9 people on your ballot? I was talking to one person who was actually following the race, and she was really surprised when she found out, when I told her, because she's been getting mailings from various candidates. She saw yard signs. She didn't realize there was actually going to be 9 people on her ballot today. She was very surprised, and she's somebody who's been following it. So we went down to Kenosha to ask voters exactly what they thought. Let's take a look at what's cooking over there. In Kenosha, an election's brewing.
I still don't know who I'm going to vote for yet. I'm going to read my flyers and educate myself.
That research might take longer than you'd expect.
I was surprised that there are 9.
These are the candidates for mayor, squished together to fit a single page.
I think it's exciting to show that people really care.
The last election, 2020, there was only one name on the ballot, Mayor John Antaramian. The former state rep led the city for 24 years, from 92 to 2008, and then again from 2016 until now. In April, the city will elect the 3rd mayor to serve since President George H.W. Bush was in the White House.
I'm not going to tell them who to vote for, but just you got to go and get a shot at it in the primary.
On this day, at this diner, we happen to run into retiring Kenosha County Supervisor John O'Day.
The biggest thing is that the treatment plant going forward, and the roads. There's a lot of roads in Kenosha that are being done, but there's a lot of roads that aren't being fixed.
The co-owner of the coffee pot also dishes out on the issues.
Keeping things safe for families, keeping our parks and our lakefront and everything available. It's a gem. It's a gem on the lake.
Soon, a new leader will lead this Wisconsin city on Lake Michigan. The 9 candidates all on the same ballot on Tuesday. Then the top 2 vote getters move on to the general election in April. Here in Kenosha, Jason Calvi, Fox 6 News.
So, if you look at that story with 9 candidates, to try to make sense of all of their differences and how do I know who I might be interested in voting for if I'm in Kenosha? I watched a candidate forum that was on YouTube, I think it was, and you just get a little bit of time with each of those candidates. There's some that stand out. You had, and I'm going to have to use last names. I don't even know the first names. There was candidate Morgan, who said she's pro-police, a constitutionalist, anti-casino. That's a big deal in Kenosha right now. You had a candidate, A. Meyer. I don't even know his first name because I don't know these candidates. He talked about concerns about police brutality, lack of affordable housing, and food deserts. There's a real distinction there. Mm-hmm. But the rest of the candidates, if you go through them, sometimes it's hard to really determine how do you separate these, and you're trying to whittle it down to 2. Obviously, in many ways, it is those mailers. It's name recognition, right? It's just people walking into the voting booth and going, I remember that flyer. I like that one. I'm going to vote for that person. Right.
Yeah. Personality issues. Some of the name recognition. There was 2 people that are running that were on the Common Council. One had been serving for 16 years on the Common Council. Remember Kenosha in 2020 was really the heart. The whole world had been watching what had happened there with the shooting of Jacob Blake, the police shooting of Jacob Blake. A police officer shot him, and then there was the whole world watching as there was a lot of destruction in Kenosha as well. Both presidential candidates, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, came to Kenosha. They really emphasized different aspects of what was going on down there. And we're seeing in this race for mayor here, remember, this is the first time we're having a mayoral election in Kenosha since those riots, since the police shooting of Jacob Blake. So we're seeing on the list of candidates here in Kenosha some community activists who really rose up to prominence in the midst of the debates in the fights that were taking place in the streets of Kenosha back in 2020. So this is a chance for them to potentially change direction in the city, and they see an opportunity here with the outgoing mayor to really get some votes tonight. We'll see how that turns out.
How many voters did you come across who had no idea there was an election going on?
That's right. I mean, that actually happened where we were talking to people voting or people milling around the city and asking them if they're voting, and I think they were surprised that we were down there, or what's going on with this election. I mean, it's February. The eyes of our attention maybe aren't focused on politics right now, especially with the presidential race won't be on the ballot until April. So even in Kenosha, where there's 9 people running, you think there'd be a lot of interest in this. We saw some yard signs, but and again, yard signs never vote, right? That's always the key concept, because you can see the signs, but we didn't see signs everywhere. Everywhere we're driving, you'd see a pocket here or a pocket there. Again, yard signs don't dictate votes, but it's one barometer that we
It can be a sign of interest.
A sign,
certainly.
literally.
Yeah, there we go.
You're right, an indicator of how much enthusiasm and interest there might be. I think you'll see more of that, obviously, when this is whittled down to 2, and we're heading toward the spring election, the April 2nd election. I think, step back for a moment, and when you talk about what's going on tonight, when you say primary, no one's getting voted into office in these primaries, right? These are nonpartisan, typically, for school boards and city councils, and they're judicial races. They're nonpartisan races. So if there are 3 or more candidates running in any particular race, that's where you're going to see a primary that occurs, and the goal is to whittle it down to 2 candidates. And those will be the people who go head-to-head on April 2nd. So it's not as though we're going to have a new Kenosha mayor tonight, but we will know potentially who the final 2 candidates are going to be going head-to-head in a couple of months.
And that's the people that we spoke with in that story. They said, it's sad that people aren't paying attention to the primary, because that's going to dictate who makes it onto that ballot in April. And this is key part of the electoral process, is to have a primary. That supervisor for the county, John O'Day, that we spoke with, his wife,
heck of a coincidence to run into him on the day you're doing that story.
His wife was with a group of women. They were in the other side of the coffee pot restaurant. And I was talking with him, and then actually earlier I was talking with his wife, and she said, well, I don't really want to talk on camera, but go talk to my husband. He knows a lot about politics. So I was like, oh, okay.
He sure does.
He sure does. Gives me his card. Oh, supervisor. And he said after he was done with our interview, he was going to go talk to the women on the other side and encourage them to vote. He wasn't going to tell them who to vote for, but he at least wanted to drum up support for the idea of voting in Kenosha.
Now, we have a lot more coming up in the next couple of hours. We're going to have some guests. One who will be coming up at 7 o'clock. We're going to talk to Milwaukee Alderman Michael Murphy. He is not running for re-election, and that's actually news in and of itself, because Michael Murphy has been on the Milwaukee Common Council for 35 years. So you go back to the late 1980s, and that's when he was first elected to the Milwaukee Common Council. There are other aldermanic races, only a few in Milwaukee that actually have primaries, but they are 3 aldermanic seats, two of which involve alderpersons who are not running for re-election. And we're going to be talking a lot about the turnover on the Milwaukee Common Council, because we were just looking at, you sort of get a feel that there's been a lot of turnover recently on the Common Council. I wanted to look at just how far back that goes. And I know, Sarah, you talked about maybe being able to bring up my laptop. I just built I have a little bit of fun. Was that?
You have Ashanti Hamilton up there, though.
No, that's back in 2020.
Okay.
That's so
2004. I'm sorry, I misread that. I thought it was 2024.
So this I don't know how easy this is to see. It's color coded. I tried to do something that, if you look at the green, so this column over here, column B, those are the current council members, except for the 3 that are not going to be running for re-election. If you kind of follow it back, you have Khalif Rainey, Michael Murphy, and Mark Borkowski, the 3 who are not running for re-election. What the green represents, though, if they're currently on the council, you follow it back. That's how far back in time these were members of the Common Council. So Bob Bauman in Aldermanic District 4, downtown Milwaukee, the farthest one going back in terms of membership on the Common Council. You've got Malele Coggs in District 6, who goes back all the way to 2008 when she was first elected. The current council president, Jose Perez, goes back to 2012. But if you look beyond that, there's a lot of change, a lot of new faces. And really, spring of 2020, if you go prior to that election, there are only 4 remaining members of the Common Council after this election who will be the same as going into that election in the spring of 2020. So you're talking 11 new members of the Common Council in Milwaukee over the past 4 years. That's a lot of turnover. We'll talk to Alderman Murphy a little bit about that, but obviously that's something to look out for. That's a huge change in the city of Milwaukee in terms of institutional knowledge and in terms of just, I guess, maybe the power structure. A lot remains to be seen of what that means politically in the city.
Well, and what it means for you, the voter, right? So when the news first came out that Alderman Murphy wasn't going to run again, and we were going out in the community and speaking to voters, there were a lot of people who had these really close ties to their local representatives, right? This is the person who you go to when there are problems with this intersection or problems with the services that you're getting. Maybe your trash is never on time. Maybe you're upset with the way that council's spending your tax dollars. Like there's a much more direct connection at this level, and you could feel that with voters as they were talking about these one-on-one interactions they had in a way that you don't necessarily get with other politicians. So I think it's significant when we go through the chart you have, Bryan, and I'm very upset because I thought I had caught you in a fact error, and I was very excited about that, and I was not correct. But when you see that visual representation of the turnover, that speaks a lot to the impact on the individual voter if they don't have that longtime person. Some people might say that's a good thing, right? The people who
Fresh
favor
faces,
term limits,
new ideas.
correct. And other people might say, hey, this is a real loss of institutional knowledge. And I understand where both perspectives come from.
We talked about there are 3 primaries in the aldermanic races in Milwaukee tonight. One is aldermanic District 5. You have an incumbent there in Lamont Westmoreland who's finishing out a term. This would be his first full term on the council, if I understand that right, and running against Bruce Winter and Stacy Smiter. And then aldermanic District 7, there are 4 candidates. Again, out of those 3, by the way, in District 5, 2 will go on to the general election, the general spring election on April 2nd. Aldermanic District 7, there's 4 candidates. That's Jessica Curry, Randy Jones, DeAndre Jackson, and Kenneth Hughes.
Mm-hmm. And that's the seat that Alderman Rainey is vacating, so he's not running for re-election. That is an open seat.
Yeah,
there.
no incumbent in that one. And same with Aldermanic District 11, Mark Borkowski, longtime county supervisor, then Milwaukee alderman. He is not running for re-election, so there are 3 candidates in District 11. That is Peter Brigelis, Lee Whiting, and Josh Zepnick. Former state representative Josh Zepnick had some trouble during the Me Too movement, but he is coming back and says he is ready to get back into public service. So he is one of 3. 2 will come out of that as well on the way into the April 2nd election.
And you did not, one of the things you did not mention, and it's not on there, is Alderman Murphy's seat. There's no primary tonight for
Right.
Alderman Murphy, so he's retiring after many, many years in office, and there's only 2 people running for that seat, so there will not be a primary tonight in Aldermanic District number 10.
I believe one of those 2 that's running, I think it's Richard Geldin, is a longtime challenger. He's run against Michael Murphy a number of times, and I believe the other is Charlene Moore, the founder of Urban Underground. So those are the 2 that are still in the race, and the 2 that will be there on April 2nd.
Yeah. And I guess, we've had some major debates in Milwaukee in recent years about things like tax money. The sales tax was just approved by the Common Council and the mayor last year in 2023, adding a 2%. It created a brand new sales tax for the city of Milwaukee of 2%, and then the county added 0.4%. So now we're looking at 7.9% sales tax in Milwaukee if you buy something, clothes, computers, cleaning items for your home, all those things that you buy but not groceries, not medicine, will be taxed at that 7.9% now. That's up from 5.5% before these new sales taxes were put into effect at the beginning of 2024.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There is a primary for Milwaukee mayor, actually. Cavalier Johnson, who is the incumbent mayor, has not served a full term yet. He is serving the remainder of the term that Tom Barrett vacated when he accepted the ambassadorship to Luxembourg and was elected in a spring election. But he is now running for his first full term. He does have a couple of challengers, but I don't think there's any expectation that he's in any real danger here. He's certainly going to make it through to April 2nd, it would seem. So we haven't really talked much about that, but there are 2 challengers for the mayor's
Aisha
post.
Griffin is running against the mayor. She has been on the ballot before, and actually she's on the ballot several times for the spring election. She's running for county executive as well as mayor, and also for common council as well. So, and you can run for all 3 of those offices.
That was my next question.
You can't hold them all.
You cannot hold them
But
all.
you can hold multiple, right?
You can hold multiple offices in the state of Wisconsin if they're not under the same jurisdiction. So you could not be the mayor and common council member, but you could be a county board member and a member of the assembly, which we have several examples of currently in the state assembly who are also county board supervisors. So you can hold multiple I forgot what the word
non-competing.
Non-competing, yeah, right. So you can be a county board member and a state rep, but you can't be the county exec and a county board supervisor at the same time.
And I think that actually is a real interesting point when we talk about the city attorney's race, which there's not a primary tonight, but there is a big city attorney election in Milwaukee coming up on April 2nd that involves the incumbent Tierman Spencer. By the way, city attorney in Milwaukee was one of those positions that didn't change for a long, long time. Grant Langley had that position forever, and then Tierman Spencer comes along and ousts him. And Tierman Spencer has had his own controversies since he's gotten into office. And now you have State Representative Evan Goyke, who is challenging him. Evan Goyke is potentially, while holding his assembly seat, potentially the last sort of barrier for Democrats to keep Republicans from having a veto-proof majority where they could actually override some of Governor Evers' vetoes this session. So even if he wins on April 2nd, it's all expectations are he will not vacate that assembly seat right away, at least, because he does not want to give that potential supermajority to the Republicans in the state legislature so that they could override Tony Evers. So he may be one of those people who holds multiple seats, at least for a period of time, should he oust the incumbent Chairman Spencer. He could be both the Milwaukee City Attorney and a state assemblyman for at least a period of time.
Right. And so right now the Assembly, Republicans in the Assembly are 2 seats shy of a supermajority. So if he were to vacate, I don't think he's going to vacate that seat, but if he did vacate that seat, then that would be 1 seat away, and then there's
one other running for judge,
right,
who would have to vacate. She would have to.
So you can't be a judge. You can't be a judge and elected to another role. So that would be something she would have to resign.
And that's why I say he becomes that sort of linchpin that if he were to vacate the seat, Republicans could then, in theory, override some of the governor's vetoes coming up here shortly, just this spring. I don't see that happening. And that, of course, all assumes that he wins the city attorney's race because he's going against an incumbent, and we know the power of incumbency. Obviously, Chairman Spencer has that advantage because he currently has that office.
I do want to see what the pulse of the voting population is like around that particular election, because normally I'd say most people aren't like, oh man, city attorney, gotta get out to vote for that. But given the controversies in office that Chairman Spencer has been dealing with, I wonder if there's more recognition, if there's more hype, or if that's just something the journalists care about.
Well, it's certainly something that people in City Hall have cared about, and people within the city attorney's office have spoken up about. There are assistant city attorneys who have left, and they have said it was because of Chairman Spencer's style of leadership. There are certainly a lot of interest among journalists, but the question is, like you said, does that translate out into voters? Are they plugged in enough to care about the city attorney's race? Evan Goyke is certainly a well-known name in Milwaukee politics. He has been in the assembly and been a very vocal advocate for a lot of issues. So does he have enough name recognition to make that a really interesting race? I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see what happens with that. Probably the most interest in a city attorney race in Milwaukee in a little while.
And Goyke is racking up endorsement after endorsement from sort of the major players in Democratic circles, including Planned Parenthood advocates of Wisconsin, union organizations as well. You've seen party leadership as well, Democratic Party leadership endorsing him in that race. So you see a lot of people trying to invest and prop up and potentially get Goyke elected there for Milwaukee city attorney. We'll see how it turns out in April.
I know. I mentioned we've got Alderman Murphy coming on at 7 o'clock. We have a couple of other guests. I believe you invited Rob Henkin from Wisconsin Policy Forum. We'll talk about a number of issues there. And who else do we have coming up? Well, we have our own Fox 6's Sam Kramer, right? Is
that guy.
Well, that guy who was out covering some of what we just talked about, some of the aldermanic races in Milwaukee. So all of that's coming up. And the polls close at 8, as they always do. I don't think we're going to be waiting around very long for results to start flowing in. Because what did we say turnout is looking like today? It's
the last update Sam Kramer sent out from the field in his reporting was that the optimistic view is 12% turnout.
And actually, that's more than I expected because I look at how many of us didn't even have races to go and vote in. I checked my what's on my ballot and empty. There's absolutely nothing. You guys had the same thing, right? There's nothing to vote for. So
I do want to make sure we get to school funding because Jason, you did a really interesting story about a ballot measure that people in that area will need to vote on.
Hey guys,
yes,
we do have Michael Murphy ready.
Oh,
so if you're ready to
early?
talk with him,
let's do
you guys
that.
want to do that before we get to the referendum
that
stuff?
Sounds great.
Absolutely. Alderman Michael Murphy, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
All right, I'm going to ask, this is like a technical favor. I'm going to ask, I don't know if you can, are you able to flip your phone? If it's a phone you're on, can you flip it sideways and give us a landscape so we can see you bigger? And there we go, fill in the full screen. Outstanding.
Is that okay?
That's perfect. Thank you.
You just made photojournalist Cale Zimney very happy, so thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for joining us. I know you've done a lot of these interviews since you announced that you're not running for re-election, but When I just think of 35 years of public service in one position in Milwaukee's 10th district, that's a long time to serve. Did you know when you first ran for alderman, did you have any idea you were going to spend 3.5 decades doing this?
God, you make me sound so old.
I can because I am too, so it's okay.
Should I not tell you that you've been doing this longer than I've been alive?
Oh, that really makes me feel good. When I first ran for office, I thought maybe 2 terms. But I really fell in love with the work and enjoyed really very much helping people and making a difference in our city. So it went faster than you might imagine.
Do you regret saying that you're not going to run for re-election? Do you wish that you would have ended up running in April?
It's a great question. No, I don't have any regrets, but you do reflect upon your life, and at certain points in times, I wonder, should I have taken a different direction going X or Y? But I was very lucky, and I'm very grateful for the people in the 16th and 10th district who elected me 9 times.
As you've done that reflection, what's the biggest issue in those 35 years that you've rethought?
Well, I think there's a lot of issues. I mean, when you're involved in local government, you have such a broad brush of issues that affect people's lives, whether it's police services, whether it's services involving, for example, cryptosporidium and the water services that we had a terrible incident back in the early 90s. So I mean, there was many different types of scenarios where I would say that your attention span is really focused on. And, because an alderman's job is so directly involved in people's daily lives, you're really quite busy on just constituent issues. But in terms of public policy issues, I was pleased to make a difference, I think, in helping a lot of people in terms of housing issues, in terms of public places, in terms of space, in terms of kids having opportunities to play on playgrounds. Fiscal issues, which I helped keep the city in solvency. So, I mean, it's a broad brush.
I was doing prep for this interview and just looked at your bio just on the website and read some more things about you. So a couple of things. First of all, I know that you are first-generation American, son of Irish immigrants, and you talked about how that has affected the importance of public service. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, my parents came from Ireland in 1960 with 2 little kids. I wasn't born yet. And he had $50 in his pocket. And he worked extremely hard to make sure that his 5 children had opportunities. And all 5 of us are graduates of UW Milwaukee. One has a doctorate from Claremont, did a fellowship at Harvard. The other was vice president at Marquette. Another is a professor in California. Another is a business executive. I was the biggest disappointment, probably. But I would say, my mom and dad really instilled into us the belief, and I know it sounds corny, but we are very, very lucky and fortunate to be U.S. citizens, and not to take that for granted, and that we had a real responsibility to do public service. So, I worked on campaigns when I was, 8 years of age. So I was involved always in thinking about, we have an obligation to give back. And that really goes to my mom and dad.
You had chaired the Budget Committee, Finance Committee for many years. When we look at the issue of this last budget where the city was finally able to open up a new fire station that had been closed. They opened it back up. They added an ambulance unit. What has this sales tax meant for the city and then moving forward as well? Well, to be perfectly frank, if we had not approved and not had the state legislature approve the sales tax, the city would be facing insolvency. It would have been unable to make its payments on its pension obligations. It would have had to make drastic cuts to public services. So it was critical for the solvency and the future of the city to have that be approved. We're one of the few cities in the United States that had relied so heavily upon property tax. Because of cuts from the state of Wisconsin in terms of a shared revenue program, we kept on falling further and further behind. So, this has now given us at least an opportunity to move forward, and hopefully we'll be able to add additional officers to the police department and the fire department. But we still, have to be conscious of the fact that we are not a wealthy city.
There's a lot of poverty in Milwaukee, and keeping a close eye on that pocketbook in terms of what you're spending money for services in the city has to be a critical issue going forward. I'm sure the mayor will do a good job doing that, but I think that's an important aspect of it.
You are known as a fiscal watchdog after 35 years, and especially with those positions on finance. If you look back, I'm going to ask you a hard question here. What are the mistakes you think the city has made in terms of spending, or what are some things you think you helped head off that would have been huge fiscal mistakes?
Yeah, another really good question. I would say that some of the biggest fiscal challenges that faced the city had to deal with its pensions. And so I think a lot of that is due to collective bargaining. And because the city is put into a very difficult position, when we collectively bargain, we still have two major, units of city government that still have that ability, and that's the police and fire department. And I don't begrudge any firefighter or police officer for trying to get the best financial deal for themselves. But, for a long period of time, it was just not supported by the fact that, at one point in time, police officers could retire at age 43 and with a full pension. And if you can imagine, that length of, average male is about 78 years of age, that's just not sustainable. So those were areas that we needed to make changes to. They should have been changed, earlier than when we did change them. But that's the reality of not looking at prospectively going forward long term. And I think that's part of the problem of our system sometimes, is that people only look at a 2 year or 4 years because of their term of office is over at that time period. But there should be more longer term planning for city government in terms of really setting goals and objectives and trying to keep to them. And I think that's something that I, tried to instill. And I would say that I wish if I had more time, I would try have that established, that there would be a longer term financing plan for the city of Milwaukee.
Speaking of planning, so this last budget round, as you mentioned, it was kind of a collective hurrah in Milwaukee. But the pension issue still exists. And then eventually the ARPA money, the federal money from COVID times, goes away. You'll be watching, of course, from a different position. But what are you most worried about for Milwaukee in that regard?
Well, you're right, Amanda, that, ARPA money was a lifesaver for the city during the COVID time period. But that money will be all expended. And most of the money that is being raised by by the sales tax, will go directly towards offsetting the pension obligations, which come to almost equal to what we're going to be collecting in the sales tax. So there's not a lot of additional revenue coming in. There's an increase in shared revenue, but it's not a huge increase. So how do you keep up with increasing salaries and staff? And I think the future challenge for council members and the mayor will be looking at having to do things differently than we ever have done before. And that means maybe cutting services or doing services differently, trying to increase productivity for the city, because we had a very difficult time keeping employees when we froze their salaries for nearly 10 years outside of police and fire. We kept on losing employees to, the suburbs or the private sector. And, so now we're increasing and bringing them back up to what they would normally receive in terms of compensation. But the bottom line is you have to looking at the long term of maybe doing things differently than you have done. And, productive things will occur over time. Everybody talks about AI, but I think AI has a great deal of potential to make changes to how we do work. And that should help in terms of reducing reliance on people. But
do you have an example of that? I'm so interested in the AI issue. Do you have an example of how AI could be used?
Yeah. I think, for example, AI can be very good at predicting patterns. So AI can be very helpful in your financial management information systems. It can help, I think, reduce, for example, accountants. It can reduce and improve upon how you deliver services. So, for example, if you write an algorithm on how the snow plowing operation's been conducted, usually that's pen and paper. So, how you put in the data and how you utilize in an efficient manner of your services, your truck driver, your sanitation workers, how you use those people in the most efficient manner. So I think those are types of productive things that can be done with AI. Obviously, in city government, though, still, you're not going to have an AI go out and replace your sewer lateral, right? At least not in the near future. So it's still labor intensive. But I do think AI can also be very helpful in terms of looking at crime pattern analysis and where you locate police stations, where you locate fire stations, how many officers should be at these locations during peak crime time periods, seasonal activities. So I think a lot of things with AI are out there that have to be still utilized.
That might be a good segue into this, because I know metrics is something you've talked about a lot with one particular topic, probably the one I've interviewed you about more than any other in my time here at Fox 6, and that is reckless driving. You became the chair of the reckless driving task force. It was actually the carjacking and reckless driving task force, but it's almost like we forgot about the carjacking part, and we talked almost exclusively about reckless driving more than anything else. But that has been something that has become synonymous with your name. You are like the reckless driving czar in Milwaukee. I do wonder, as you leave, who takes on that mantle, because you have been a constant voice in talking about the city needing to do things in the areas of both engineering and enforcement, and then also in education. Those are the three pillars that came out of that reckless driving task force. Who is going to carry that mantle when you leave office?
I think there's every alderman who in the city of Milwaukee, that is pretty much the number one issue they hear from their constituents. So it's incumbent upon all the aldermen that will take this up. So I know that, for example, Spikert Alderman Westmoreland, this is a very important issue to them too, and they've talked about and they've done and introduced some legislation as it relates to reckless driving, and I know they will pick up the mantle. But I think every alderman really focuses on that issue. The other things, I focus on were, creating public places and far playgrounds for our children. So I was pleased to raise over $4 million privately. That helped, I think, now develop over 22 playgrounds in the heart of our city. And then the other big crisis point that I think we don't talk about enough is as the task force I created on the opiate, heroin, and cocaine overdose issues in our community. That still is a raging crisis in our country, but the stigma associated with it is still preventing a lot of people from getting treatment and help.
For the person who eventually ends up filling your seat, what's one thing you wish you had known going into the job that you would tell that person that maybe isn't super obvious or might seem counterintuitive?
Well, I don't mean to sound trite, but it's much more time than you realize if you want to do the job the right way. So, you're on duty pretty much all the time. Now, I don't get calls at 2 a.m. On occasion I do, but, you can't really go anywhere without somebody stopping you in a grocery store or where you walk in the street and giving you a complaint or problem. So I think what I was really fortunate and lucky is I have a beautiful, smart, brilliant wife who is very understanding of what I did for a living and tolerated it and was supportive. And then I have a perfect, beautiful daughter who's just turned 18 and not too long ago and is now looking at going into college. So I think I was fortunate, really. I would tell any candidate or any person going to office, make sure you touch base with your loved ones because they're involved in the job more than you may realize.
But were you surprised when, after 35 years in that position, only 2 people put their names in the hat or on the ballot for this April election? Not even a primary tonight for your seat. This was an opportunity for a whole bunch of community leaders, activists, others to run, and they decided to sit this one out. Were you surprised?
Yeah, I was, and disappointed. I think when I first ran, there was 11 candidates. And I think part of this gets back to, we are a very divisive community as a country. And I think people have seen, the worst of politics and people are turning them back to it. And the reality is, because of social media, I think your life is always out there. It's constantly people, videotaping and I think there's a lot of people who just say, well, it's not really worth it. And then, the compensation, I hadn't had a raise since I've been there for a long time, but there was no increase in salary for nearly, 14 years. And that's not really practical for a lot of people because they got to live. And so I think there's a lot of reasons why. But I mean, we had 8 automatic races in the city of Milwaukee where there was no opposition. I never saw that before. And I would just encourage, your listeners and viewers is that it is an honorable profession. It's tough, it's difficult, but there's a great sense of accomplishment. You're not going to become wealthy unless you're crooked. But the reality is you get a great sense of value of helping people. And I think that's valued in terms of you personally and what it means to society. And I hope more people in the future will reconsider and decide to serve their community.
Rack that soundbite, by the way. We're saving that one. That was good. All right. Jason, you've got something.
Well, just that you had mentioned the compensation. There was the 14 years that you didn't get a pay raise at all as an alderman. You voted against, though. You voted against the pay raises for the common council members, a 15% pay raise, and you said no thanks. Do you regret that vote, knowing that only 2 people signed up or are on the ballot for your position come April?
It's a balance because on one aspect of it, as I indicated in the article, that I said I would support something, but not a double-digit increase. But you got to keep in mind, the city of Milwaukee residents, there's, a good 40% in poverty. And that's a pretty harsh statistic. And you have to keep that in mind as what you can reasonably ask people to pay in taxes to be able to stay in their homes. So it always is a balance between those 2 issues.
We're going to let you go here shortly. We appreciate all the time you spent, but we do have to ask this. You've mentioned possible interest in running for city comptroller. Is that still a possibility? Would you know what's next for Michael Murphy?
I gave serious thought to that. There's only 2 candidates in that race also, so there was no primary. So that is up for this April. But, I think what's next for me is undecided yet. I haven't made that choice where I'm going to go next.
Can I just?
Oh yeah.
Oh, I was going to. Okay, one more from me. One more from you. Psych. That was not the last question. I'm going to ask the nosy question I ask every outgoing boss that I have. I'm going to ask it to you. What's one thing you can tell us now that you couldn't tell us before? Now that you're on your way out, maybe you have a little more freedom to be a little more unfiltered. What can you tell us now that you couldn't tell us before?
Well, Amanda, I'm still serving till April, so that would be risky.
Yeah, but you're on your way out.
I wondered, I was like, is he going to fall for this? I don't know about that.
It's not a trick. I'm just nosy.
Yeah, that was a nice try, though. No, I would say, sometimes you just need to be kinder and nicer to people. And if any regrets I have is, sometimes your passion can overrule being compassionate and kind, and that would be a regret I would have is if I ever hurt somebody's feelings, I feel bad about that. But the reality is that would be my biggest regret.
That's good life advice right there. Don't let your passion overrule compassion.
And Alderman Murphy, I have one more question. We were Bryan was mentioning earlier that there's only going to be 4 members of the Common Council that date back to
prior to the 2020 spring election. There will only be 4 of the same council members after this spring election. 11 out of the 15 seats will have changed.
73% turnover since 2020. What does that mean for Milwaukee?
It means there's a lot of young people that, or young, non-experienced people in public office, and that can be good and bad. I mean, the fact they coming at this with fresh eyes and a new perspective, and a lot of energy, but it'll be incumbent upon people who have more years of service, and we have a pretty well-established civil service system, so there's still a lot of pretty deep pockets in the bureaucracy to move things along. So I would say, and I have a good, confidence in the mayor. I think he's a really good man, and he works very hard, and I think he will do a good job along with many of my colleagues on the council. I think somewhere off.
Alderman Murphy, really appreciate the time you spent with us today, and I know you've got a couple of more months to serve. You can be really candid with Amanda after April 2nd. No, seriously.
Yeah, Amanda, give me a call, but you won't.
Sounds great. April 3rd.
No, in all seriousness, thank you for the time, and thank you for your 35 years of service to the city of Milwaukee.
Yeah, and thank you for even inquiring. I'm honored that you did. Appreciate
All right.
it.
Alderman Michael Murphy, 10th District Alderman for another couple of months in the city of Milwaukee. We have another guest, and I don't know if we have that guest already here with us, or are we in a few minutes? No, not yet. Okay, but we will be speaking shortly to Rob Henkin with Wisconsin Policy Forum. That was a great time. We could have probably talked to Michael Murphy all night. I mean, I think I had a million questions I'd love to have asked him. One of them that I didn't get a chance to ask it has nothing to do with politics, but you think guy who spent 35 years in public service on the budget committee and all that sort of thing. And I look at his bachelor's degree; it's in geological sciences. I didn't expect that, and I wonder, I have questions about that.
I like it. I'll save my "What was your most frustrating Bryan Polcyn moment?" question for him on April 3rd as well.
I wonder if I had frustrated. I mean, I've frustrated a few politicians. I don't know if
Yeah.
I've ever frustrated Michael Murphy.
You probably
Maybe.
did.
Probably
You're a
on
good
reckless
journalist.
driving.
Yeah.
Maybe on some reckless. I mean, I do think when we went, I go step back to when we first started talking about reckless driving, and I think it's still an issue today. It's a term that's thrown around almost as though everyone knows what it means, but it means something different to everyone.
Yeah.
One of the first questions we asked Alderman Murphy, this was right before the pandemic. They had their last public hearing on the reckless driving task force.
We both went. I remember that.
And we both went. And one of the things we asked was, what does reckless driving mean? Can you define it? And I remember his answer was, you kind of know it when you see it. It's not that easy to define. Is just speeding reckless driving? Well, maybe, maybe not. Is it speeding and swerving the car? Is it, what defines something or classifies something as reckless driving? And I think even today when we talk about how pervasive is it, how do you measure if it's improved? What exactly are you testing to see is reckless driving better or worse? In many ways, it's often more of a feeling or an emotion than something that you can really break down because everyone seems to sort of define it a little bit differently.
Well, and that's the hard thing when you're tackling an issue like that as a government entity, right? I do remember when the task force findings came out and they had their list of things they needed to do, and one of them was find out the root cause of reckless driving.
Wait, that was the task force?
Yeah, and it
was
was like,
supposed
wait
to be
a minute,
about, right?
what's
Yeah.
happening? I don't think most people are going, oh, good, a task force. But the reality is when you're talking about government work and what you're able to do and what you're able to accomplish, that often is the start. So I think it'll be interesting to see down the road as we go back and look at those findings and see what the city has checked off. Where are we with each of those things? And I know that that's something that was really important to Alderman Murphy.
It's one of the things I'll credit him on is he has repeatedly gone back in council meetings and committee meetings and said, we need metrics. We need to be able to find some way to measure this so we know if what we're doing is working, because we can try a dozen things, 100 things, but if we don't have any way to measure success, how do we know if it's working? I know that's something he has talked about. I see Sarah raising her hand, which means we have our next guest. Is that right? Mm-hmm. And that guest, Rob Henkin with the Wisconsin Policy Forum. Rob, thank you for coming on with us. I wanted to say on Open Record. This isn't actually Open Record, but it's Fox 6 digital coverage on Fox Local, fox6now.com, and the Fox 6 YouTube channel on You Decide 2024. Thank you for coming on. Obviously, you guys are knee-deep in all kinds of research right now.
That is correct. So thank you very much for having me.
We are talking about the April election that's on the horizon. We've got a primary tonight. We've got Milwaukee leadership on the line for county exec, mayor, common council will all be on the ballot this coming April. Maybe not necessarily tonight, with a lot of the aldermanic races are not competitive tonight, but they will be in April. What are some of those issues that you guys have been researching at the Wisconsin Policy Forum, and what would be the advice for the common council, the new common council, which would be a lot of new members? Bryan's done the research. I think we're going to have 73% turnover since 73% of the council is going to be turned over since 2020. So a huge turnover since 2019, since the beginning of the pandemic. So when you're looking at those finances for the city, what are the challenges moving forward for the city of Milwaukee?
Yep. So the backbone of our research agenda is always government finance. We review the city and county budgets every year. We were the group that was raising the alarm bells more than a decade ago that both the city and the county were really on track for some very formidable financial challenges. Looking forward, I think it's clear that the adoption of Wisconsin Act 12 last summer, that's the legislation that increased shared revenue payments for city government by about $21 million per year to start. Also some promise of future increases as state sales tax revenues grow. We also, of course, saw the legislation grant the city the ability, which it took advantage of, to adopt a 2% sales tax, and the county an extra 0.4% sales tax. So I think the key question is, does that get that city government and county government out of the woods financially? Does it just give them some breathing room? And if so, for how long? And I must say that when we went then a few months later and looked at their 2024 budgets, we were sort of taken aback a little bit by the fact that, yes, while the city is out of the woods in terms of the potential for draconian service cuts that it was facing, really its fiscal stability is only good for a year or so. By this coming fall, when city leaders consider their 2025 budget, there is going to be a deficit, and there is going to be a need once again to consider where to cut instead of where to invest.
You mentioned service cuts, and I want to bring this back home to the people who are watching who don't necessarily live in the weeds of the finances. So if things continue on their current path, what does this mean for the person sitting at home who may or may not regularly go out to vote, who may or may not understand the impact that of how their tax dollars are spent and what that means for them?
So, city government is the entity that is responsible for providing so many services that are just core services on which citizens depend. It all starts with public safety, of course, and police and fire. And a key question going forward is the extent to which the city is really, because the new state law also requires the city to have a so-called maintenance of effort with regard to police and fire staffing, and over time to increase staffing levels for both the police and the fire departments, one would imagine that those services would at least be maintained at present levels. But unless something else gives, right now what it's looking like is that other city services could very well suffer in order to keep public safety sufficiently funded. So libraries, garbage collection, the filling of potholes on city streets, neighborhood services, maintenance for city parks and playgrounds, those are all services that are also important to citizens. And the question is, as we look to the future, will the extra funds that the state has now allowed the city to generate, will those cover those ongoing cost increases? And if not, where can the city turn? And I guess the final thing I'll say before your next question is, in terms of where could the city turn, we see some real potential to enhance collaboration with other local governments, starting with Milwaukee County. And have we reached the point where we really do need to consider much greater service sharing and consolidation of services?
What does that collaboration, what does that service sharing look like? Can you give us an example?
Sure. So there are actually several examples, but let's just start with a couple that the Wisconsin Policy Forum has already researched. Public safety dispatch is a good example, where we have a system here in Milwaukee County where there are about a dozen public safety answering points throughout the county. There are many counties our size that have a single dispatch center. So we have a city dispatch center, we have a county dispatch center, we have essentially 10 or 11 municipal dispatch centers. And so there's a question there whether you could consolidate those services, whether by doing so you could reduce staffing levels, free up some money, not only to save property tax dollars, but also potentially to invest more readily in newer technology for these dispatch operations. Public health is another example where Milwaukee County is the only county in the state of Wisconsin in which public health services are a municipal responsibility instead of a county responsibility. So here, too, we have a little bit of consolidation. There's a consolidated North Shore Health Department. But otherwise, with a couple of other exceptions, each municipality has its own public health department, and certainly a question could be raised as to whether there could be a level of consolidation either at the city level or at the county level to serve the citizens, all of the citizens of Milwaukee County.
Rob, is that something that would entail a state law change, or is that just something that Milwaukee County, they've just always had these broken up health departments?
Yeah, no. So in terms of both public health and public safety dispatch, where there may have to be some consideration of some statutory changes are with the complicated shared revenue formula, as well as the property tax levy limits. And would consolidation somehow cause one of the entities that is housing a consolidated department to run afoul of these levy limits? But other than that, really, these are examples of collaboration that for the most part should be able to occur without state authority in Madison.
You know, Amanda said earlier very well that a lot of people aren't in the weeds. Most people at home aren't in the weeds that you guys are. And that's why you exist, is because you can get into the weeds and tell us what these things look like. But for someone sitting at home who goes, okay, you were telling me, you meaning the city of Milwaukee, we're facing a cliff. We're about to go off the cliff. We're going to go off the cliff. And now we can breathe a sigh of relief. We finally got the money we need. We're not going off the cliff anymore. And we're almost immediately going off a cliff again. And I think particularly about the American Rescue Plan Act, which you mentioned, obviously that has been a huge a boost for a lot of governments. Temporary, though, and that money is going away. How much do you see in terms of the city and county? How much reliance is there on that money right now? And is there any replacement for that money when it's gone? Or have we committed ourselves to services that money does not exist to continue?
It's an outstanding question, and I'll try not to get too deep into the weeds in answering it. But you're absolutely correct. What was really creating the huge crisis for the city before the adoption of Wisconsin Act 12 this past summer was the fact that the city had plugged $80 million of this so-called ARPA money, which is temporary money, into its 2023 budget. And so the city was looking at being able to maybe put that much money in for one additional year. And then when that money disappeared, that would have created an immediate $80 million hole. You add on top of that the fact that its required pension fund contribution was scheduled to spike by minimally $60 million. And so that was a really big cliff. Because of the inflow of sales tax revenue, what the city was able to do in this year's budget was accommodate the huge increase in pension costs, make up for years of underinvestment in other city services, and use the last of those ARPA dollars to have a pretty good budget in 2024. But now those ARPA dollars will be expired, will be all used up after 2024. So that creates an immediate $100 million hole in next year's city budget. I don't want to get in the weeds. There are some other circumstances within the budget that we project should allow the city to relatively painlessly fill about $50 or $60 million of that hole. But there is a $40 million to $50 million projected shortfall heading into next year. Now, that's nothing like the $150 or $200 million shortfall that would have been the projection had this state legislation not been adopted. So I don't know if I term it a cliff, but it's certainly a difficult step, let's say, for the city to overcome. And
there's a curb into the street, right?
To deal with it, but still will be challenged.
We have people who are vying to be on Milwaukee Common Council. It's primary night. If you were one of those people, what would be the first thing you would do going into office?
Again, it all starts with city finances. So the question is, to me, it's the one of the real challenges is going to the state for more help would seem to be off the table for at least a few years, given the huge dosage of help that state government provided to the city this past summer. So I think the question is, what are the priorities? Are there certain services that city government is performing right now that potentially could be shared with either Milwaukee County government or other local units of government? Now, it takes two to tango. So an incoming city alderman may feel like, hey, it would make perfect sense for the city to talk to the county about consolidating certain administrative services or certain public works services, et cetera. The county would have to be a willing partner. Similarly,
easier said than done.
Exactly, easier said than done. But clearly that could be considered. And then I think city government may have to face some of the same very difficult decisions that Milwaukee County government has faced over the past decade and more, which is let's prioritize our list of services. And if push comes to shove, are we better off providing those most vital services in a manner that will satisfy our constituents and using our finite resources to make sure that we can do a very good job with our core services, maybe at the expense of looking at some services that just aren't as essential and not doing those? Again, do we feel like virtually every service and every program that we are providing is an essential program and service? And if that's the case, then I think really the question is, well, then how can we do those more efficiently? And might there be opportunities to achieve the same level of service by potentially consolidating some of those functions with some of our neighboring governments?
People at home might be scratching their head right now. They said that sales tax was implemented. We're paying that now in 2024 on clothes, computers, things for your home, etc. And this is supposed to bring in, the comptroller estimated $184 million a year. So they might be asking themselves, how in the world is it that, again, this fall we might have to make budget cuts when we've got all this extra income coming into the city right now? I know you mentioned the federal relief money is going to run out, but how is it possible that after the sales tax we're still potentially having to make cuts for next year?
Yep. It's many years of city revenues not keeping pace with city expenditure needs. So that hole has built and is built and is built. And there's absolutely no question that the amount of money provided by the sales tax, the increase in shared revenue, are very helpful. But when you do the math, the hole had reached more than $200 million in terms of what city budget officials projected was going to be necessary just to maintain services at current levels. Now, there's some factors there that nobody could have anticipated. Nobody could have anticipated an 8% rate of inflation a couple of years ago, or greater than 4% in each of the last 3 or 4 years. And nobody could have projected the state of the labor force and the workforce in Southeast Wisconsin. So there's real pressure on city leaders to be able to provide sufficient increases in pay and benefits so that they can successfully retain and recruit staff. So the ongoing costs to continue these services are quite simply still, even after this historic state legislation, are still projected to grow faster than the projected rate of increase of the city's key revenue streams. So might there be some other revenue streams, certain types of fees and so forth that could be tweaked to raise a little more revenue? Possibly. Of course, that may not be popular. Might there be some city properties that could be sold, that could bring in some cash, that could allow the city to maybe smooth things out over a couple of years? Does the city have other opportunities to sell advertising and to raise other forms of revenue? These are all things that need to be examined, and a hole in the $40 million range one could imagine how that potentially could be filled with some of these types of strategies, whereas the previous hole certainly could not have. But still, if this is the whole year after year after year, then that is a fierce challenge.
Before we let you go, Rob, I want to ask about school referendums because we have a big one coming. It's not on the ballot tonight, but it is going to be in April on that. There's others on the ballot tonight. I think Waterford Union is one, but Milwaukee Public Schools has a huge referendum coming up in April. I know you guys have tracked the success of school referenda over the past number of years, and there was a huge peak, a spike in these. I want to say it was maybe 2021, 2022, and they've dropped off a little bit since. There was also a really high success rate for a time period there, and that seems to have come down. What is Milwaukee Public Schools facing in terms of the potential for success here based on what you've seen in the last couple of years?
Well, it's a difficult question to answer, given that they enjoyed so much success, somewhat surprisingly, just 4 years ago. In 2020, I believe the referendum to exceed state revenue limits by $87 million was approved with roughly 75% of the vote. So I don't know that anybody anticipated that. This is a much bigger ask. The ask is $252 million of extra revenue authority. Not all of that is increased property taxes, and it's phased in over 4 years. But the impact on the owner of a $200,000 property in year one is $400, and that's certainly nothing to sneeze at. So I think coming so soon after this previous referendum, and given the very large dollar amount, and given the fact, through no fault of MPS leaders, that city residents, in order to avert the fiscal cliff for city government, are now paying a new 2% city sales tax. I think those factors might lead one to believe that this might be a very difficult vote for MPS leaders to win. On the other hand, voters in Milwaukee have shown that they value K-12 education. MPS leaders do have a compelling case to make that their own revenue streams, particularly because of these state-imposed revenue limits, have not been able to expand at a pace that would allow them to meet the needs of students. So they have a compelling case to make. Another factor here is MPS's declining enrollment over time. MPS has lost 35% of its students, roughly, over the past 2 decades. And so a key question mark is, should the district be able to survive with fewer revenues given this decline in enrollment? So these are all difficult questions. I'm not a political prognosticator, but what I do want your viewers to be aware of is that the Wisconsin Policy Forum will be releasing a detailed analysis of the referendum sometime within the first 2 weeks of March.
And you bring up an interesting point there with the idea of referendum fatigue, because you have people from all these different entities coming at them asking for more money, and I think that's going to be an interesting factor to watch as you have all of those competing influences here.
Yes, again, it's for the city of Milwaukee, so it's not just the 2% city sales tax, it's an additional 0.4% county sales tax. It's a referendum just 4 years ago, and it's a lot. And again, we're talking an electorate where Milwaukee is not a wealthy community. So it's a big ask, but it is for a vital public service, K-12 education. And so it certainly makes for an interesting observation for political geeks like us when April 2nd rolls around.
Rob Henkin, the president of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, thank you so much for joining us to share all this information regarding Milwaukee and its future as we're having primary night tonight. Looking forward to that election come April.
Yeah, political geek night, right?
That's right.
And thanks for the heads up on that report that's coming out. We'll be watching for that. Thanks a lot.
Okay, great. Thanks so much for having me.
again, that's another. It's an organization that they are in the weeds, but they do so. I mean, if you want to find an organization that can give you some charts on government finance, nobody's better than Wisconsin Policy
Well, and
on
it's,
that one.
they're in the weeds, so everyone else doesn't have to be, right? That's often that's our job. They're deep in the weeds. We're like a level removed from that, and then all of us are there, kind of keeping you out of the weeds so that you can distill down the big information. But that's an interesting point. And Jason, that would be a good story idea to kind of calculate, over the last few years, what are all the things that taxpayers in Milwaukee, between county, city sales tax, all the last referendum, all the things that they're still paying off.
And then you add that into just general inflation. These people have seen their grocery bills go up. The cost of everything has gone up. And then they're getting these incremental increases in taxes. Yes, the 5-county sales tax went away with the stadium, but other things are replacing it. And so there is that question of how much is too much for the voter. We'll find that out on April 2nd with this particular referendum. We'll find out some of them tonight. Waterford Union, obviously, with a very big school referendum.
Yeah. Can we talk about Waterford Union, or do we have something else coming up?
Do we have Sam waiting yet? Or we have Sam? Okay, I do want to talk about that.
Wait.
We have been teasing.
Yes.
We've been pushing ahead to this referendum. I promise
Jason,
you we're going to get it.
It's called the deep tease behind
and Sam is probably
the scenes
thinking,
producing
I've got work
terms.
to do for 9 and 10. Can we just get on with this? Sam,
that's what his face says.
Fox
That's
6 is Sam
exactly
Kramer.
what his face says.
We've been holding you up. Sam, thanks for joining us. You are covering this primary election night tonight. What have you been looking at, and what are you hearing?
Yeah, so we're covering the two T's. I'll call it turnout, but also turnover. And so we bounced around at a couple of polls within the city of Milwaukee where voters aren't just deciding the citywide race for mayor. They also have a decision when it comes to their alderman. And, we've seen a lot of history in this position that all of a sudden seems to be changing. Michael Murphy stepping down from District 10, Mark Borkowski from District 11, and Khalif Rainey from District 7. So we actually went to District 7 and 11, where there are at least 3 candidates, which means that the voters tonight have a decision in who the top 2 are that they are actually sending to the ballot for April. And it's really interesting. I had a call earlier today with the city's election commission. The executive director, Claire Woodall, so she's optimistically hoping for about 12% turnout. And that's actually pretty close to on par with what we've seen as far as the people that are coming out. Everyone that we interviewed said, hey, I vote, I show up for every single election. Doesn't matter what's on the ticket. But they certainly had an interest in who is going to represent them. Some people, maybe hinting to the fact that they want a continuation or someone similar. Like, when Murphy first announced that he was retiring, we went and talked to people there and they said, who we want? Someone just like Michael Murphy, which is interesting to hear. Today, I heard different things. They want change. They want someone that isn't just going to voice a promise. They want someone that's going to deliver a promise on things like reckless driving and, public works, keeping the city clean and that sort of thing. So the turnover is really interesting. We're looking at least 20% in just those 3. And if you go back even just a year, they elected 2, Andrea Pratt and Lamont Westmoreland by special election. So that's 2 more. So that's 5. That's a third of the council. If you go back to 2020 council, it's looking like we're only going to have 4 people left. So that's 75% of the council that's new over that time, which is really notable, with just how much of Milwaukee they're representing.
I imagine them all sitting around a campfire as Bob Bauman and Lily Cox tell them stories of old yore.
That's one heck of a campfire.
But I wondered this, and you already told me this earlier. This is not the case. I did wonder, because we keep talking about this being primary night, that some people might go, oh my gosh, primary! I've got to get to the polls and vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Nikki Haley or whatever. But you didn't run into anybody who made that mistake today?
No, everyone seemed uniquely dialed in, which I thought was interesting, because it's just not an election. This one in February, we know it's a big year, and certainly are watching all around. But locally, you thought there might be some interest. No, everyone is zeroed in. They know they have the mayor, and in the polls that we went to, they know they have the alderman as well. So everyone seemed to be spot on. Some admitted they had done some research. Others maybe not so much. They'd seen campaign flyers or actually talked to a candidate, but no surprises, which is a good thing when you think about it.
Yeah, this is like the day of the diehards, right? These
Yeah,
are
right,
your
yeah.
people
Yes.
who really do care. I don't know that you're going to have a lot of people who are like, I'm voting for the first time in the primary tonight.
This isn't the day where there were lines out the door that you had
Right.
to wait a long time to get into the
yeah,
voting
certainly.
booth.
There were no lines, but there were some registrations, which is cool to see.
Yeah.
In a election of perhaps not the biggest in terms of circumstances. There were some same day registrations, not when we were there, but that's according to the poll workers. But yeah, that's the good news. They're in and out in like 5 minutes, if that.
So I've got this this little binder that I put together today. That actually it's only a few pages for today, but I have this. It happened to be that I was using a binder from 2022. So this is the spring election. Now it wasn't primary; it was the April election. But I had listed sort of some basic stats when we got on the air, and one of them was 1,441 candidates in 11 county area of southeastern Wisconsin, 844 elected offices. Very different from what we're dealing with tonight. There's not as much on the ballot, but this is that sort of harbinger of things to come because we do have the April election coming. And then obviously it's a presidential election year, the RNC. This is a big political year in Wisconsin, and I'm sure you'll be covering a lot of that too, Sam.
Yeah, it's the start of what's to come, right? 4, if you're lucky. I know myself in Wauwatosa, I had to kind of actually go back and look and see, do I have something to vote on today? I don't. Okay, all right, I'm good.
That's all four of us.
All four of
Yeah.
us, Sam. None of us had
thing.
primaries today.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Well-
but hey, it's the start, right? It's almost like spring training, if you will, and just getting things going.
Sam, you get a lot of the political assignments at night when Jason isn't here, right? Jason's here during the day. Sam's here at night. When you do a story like this, what are you most excited for or interested in? Because I'd imagine after a while you're talking to voters, you're hearing kind of the same thing. So from the reporting standpoint, what are you looking out for?
That's a good question. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is I like talking to somebody that doesn't have necessarily an agenda and trying to get themselves hired. It's interesting to see also in warfare is not the right word, but the effort that all these politicians and candidates put forward. It's interesting to see what sticks when people come to the poll or when they come out of the poll in terms of what they want for change, what they think needs to be improved, and just kind of how effective that ground game is, so to speak, as someone who isn't necessarily in it every minute of every day when I'm reporting for the shows. But there's also this kind of organic excitement from people when they walk out and they have their sticker on and they feel like they've done something good, and that is really cool to see. It doesn't matter where they are, at least today in the city of Milwaukee, from south side to farther the west and north side. There's a lot of interest and there's a lot of responsibility that comes with casting that ballot, and it's clear that people are seeing that, and I think that's cool to see.
I have good news for you tonight, Sam, because when you're out in the field covering politics in the evening, usually on election night, it means you're missing out on newsroom pizza. But there is no newsroom pizza tonight because there's just not enough.
But you
on
know
the
what?
ballot,
There
right?
is a killer snack table.
Don't tell
There's a
Sam
potluck,
that.
yeah.
You're just going to make him
I
feel
saw
bad.
the email yesterday.
Yeah, the email came from me. I'm hyping up the snack
Yeah.
table.
All right. Well, we'll hit the snack table after 9 o'clock, I guess.
I'll save you stuff, Sam. Don't worry.
Sam, we know you've got newscasts to go get ready for, so thank you for taking the time to join us here on our Fox digital platforms, and go finish up what you got to do.
All right, sounds
All right,
good.
thanks.
Thank you all.
See you at 9.
Fox 6's Sam Kramer out covering the elections out in the field. I do think it's interesting that he pointed out that this is like the election of the dialed in. These are the voters, these are the diehards, these are the people who take pride in knowing I've never missed an election. I'm going to get to every one. Right. And I think we probably would have been those people if we had something to vote for.
Yeah, we feel
right?
disappointed that we
Yeah.
looked up our ballot and it was like the ballot for April is not ready yet because you don't have a primary tonight.
My kids were disappointed they didn't get their I voted stickers.
Oh,
they
there you
like
go.
they
Yeah.
like going with me.
I feel like it's like if you're like I'm a baseball fan, like Major League Baseball season, and all the teams are playing, but your team isn't, or if like the week when the Packers have a bye. Come on, let me play. But we didn't have anything to do.
So
with that today.
polls are open for another 15 minutes.
Yeah.
They close at 8. And we'll be watching those results coming in. We're watching some referenda across the state. We've got 3 school districts in our region that are doing referendum tonight. We've got the mayoral race in Kenosha that we're monitoring. We're monitoring some local common council races here in Milwaukee, as well as county board positions across the region as well. So we're watching all of those, but polls will now be closing in 14 minutes. So you still have time to vote.
Does that mean now we get to talk about school funding? Is now our chance? Okay, Sarah says yes. Thumbs up.
So school funding in our area, there's three school districts tonight that are having referendum, and the one is they all have tried this in the past. Each of these school districts, Burlington area, as well as Wilmot Union and Waterford Union, have all in the last year asked voters to approve millions of dollars for their school districts, and all three of those districts, the voters last year said no thanks. In Waterford Union, this is actually the third attempt to get voters, and theirs is the largest tonight. They're going for $91 million, and we went to the school district to find out exactly what the needs were and what was going on in Waterford Union at the high school there.
Time's almost up for voters in the Waterford Union High School District. On Tuesday, they'll decide whether to raise their taxes to fix aging infrastructure.
This is one that broke behind the wall, and we had to smash this in and cut this panel in just so we could get to it. So it ends up being costly.
We're right now in the guts of the school, behind the scenes. Look at these old pipes above me. They all date to the 1950s, and they're in need of some major repairs.
Or the galvanized down, sprung holes start popping. The hole is from a water leak that was taken apart.
Voters will see two questions. The first is to invest $77 million inside the school. That money would include knocking down and rebuilding part of the high school campus that was an old elementary school. It's 65 years old.
This project will only cost our taxpayers more if we continue to kick that can down the proverbial road.
The referendum would also boost space for fine arts and career training.
We'd like to create a career and technology education wing where kids can move right into the careers and the trades, make a good salary, but being educated in appropriate size spaces.
The second question is whether to invest $14 million for athletic facilities, including accessible parking, installing permanent bathrooms, and moving the softball fields that right now are in a floodplain. Voters here rejected the last two in smaller referenda. Will the third time be the charm, or will voters close the door on the latest proposal?
One of those issues that's on the ballot tonight, and of course, critics are questioning the raising of the taxes here. So, for example, for a median home there, the average home, the typical home there, $400,000 home, you're looking at several $100s more every single year in property taxes, and this will be there.
Did you say for $100,000 or a $400,000 home?
I'm trying to get my notes here, and
I wasn't sure if you said for $100,000 or $400,000.
$400,000.
Okay, $400,000 home
for a $400,000 home.
Okay, it's several $100s in increased taxes.
Right, every
That's
year.
a big chunk.
Yeah.
That they're asking for. I always find it interesting when you look at, you mentioned athletic facilities are a piece of that. Sometimes I do wonder if you've got a team or a school where there's a great enthusiasm for athletics, sometimes that can overcome. People are willing to pay, even though maybe some might say that's not as important as a boiler, right? The boiler, you need to have that. It's not as exciting. But sometimes athletic things can go a long way if you've got a community that's really excited about the local teams.
And they broke it up into two questions tonight in Waterford Union. So the first question regards the school inside. You're talking about the leaky pipes. You're talking about all those things that we showed on the inside. And then the second one regards the school athletic facilities on the outside. So voters will have the option there to potentially, accept the inside funding and reject the athletic funding, or vice versa.
Can I ask one? This is a dumb question, but it's one that strikes me.
No
every
such thing
time.
as dumb questions,
It's
Bryan.
every time we talk about referendums or referenda. Which is it, or are both acceptable?
Well, referenda is the plural, right?
You're right, but is referendums
we're talking about Latin.
also acceptable? Mordecai's going to join us in a minute. He's over there. He knows the answer. I know he knows the answer. But I always find myself going back and forth, and I feel like if I just stuck to one.
Referenda sounds better.
And it's the proper Latin.
I think it's proper, but I think to me it sounds pretentious. I don't know why. I feel like referendums. Anyway, I hope I'm not the only one who wonders that. I've got to think other people are thinking, is it referendums
you
or
might
referenda?
be the only one who wonders that.
That's okay.
I feel like the AP style guide. Does anybody have that on their computer?
No,
check? Because
no,
I feel like the AP.
I won't be surprised if you have it bookmarked.
I feel like the AP does referendums, and I just feel like it seems like you're mishandling the language. Like, this is not our language to just like make up these words and say it's referenda, folks. I'm sorry. It's like graffiti is plural of graffitum.
We know what Jason thinks on this one. Okay.
Well,
that's the only thing you're going to get my opinion on.
And it was just, we're off to the races.
So I mentioned we have Mordecai Lee here to join us, and so since we only have 3 seats up here, I think Amanda is going to abandon hers for a little while, and we'll bring Mordecai in to talk all about what's on the ballot tonight and also what's ahead, because there's a lot more ahead when it comes to politics. This is what happens when you're doing the digital stuff. We don't have a commercial break to go to here, so you just get to see us switch seats, and Mordecai puts on some headphones.
So I wanted to talk about that while he's getting seated. The Waterford Union High School district in Racine County, as far as the median home there, so that the average home in that district is $400,000. So pretty nice houses out there, right? And the homeowner there, that average homeowner in Waterford Union, would see an extra $33 per month on their property taxes. That's
month, not okay.
$33 per month in property taxes. That's roughly $400 per year for that median. I think it's a pretty nice house for $400,000, but that's what you would see down there in Waterford Union. Voters, again, this is the 3rd time, so it's the 3rd time the charm. We're going to see exactly what the voters down there think about this one. This one's the largest. The past one last year was $24 million. This year, they're going all in. They're saying $91 million. So they're going a lot higher than they got rejected for last year, but they're saying if voters approve it in Waterford Union, they're not going to go to referendum again for 12 years. So it's like a deal. You approve this, no more referendum.
I have a question. I thought that school referendums or referenda, we can talk about that in a second. I thought they had to be on a general election day. I was surprised it's permitted to be on a primary election day. Do you know how that worked?
It's allowed. It's happening in 3 of our districts: Wilmont, Union, as far Burlington area, and then Waterford Union. So it is allowed. And as we were talking earlier, these are the diehards that turn up for a nonpartisan primary in February. We're not talking about the presidential race. These are very local school board races, as well as, you know, your common council, your city mayor potentially is on the ballot. For many of us, we didn't have anybody to vote for today. There was no primary for several of us up here. The question is, these are the diehards that are voting, so it might be more likely that you can get this passed in a February versus in April.
Or are those are they more likely to be the people who are really going to be tight with the pocketbooks and say, I don't know. I guess I don't know strategically what's better.
But on the other hand, MPS, doesn't MPS have a referendum coming up in April?
Yes, in April, right, yeah.
Now, there's a citywide race today. That was the mayoral primary. Wouldn't it have been a smart idea for MPS to do their referendum today? Because in a sense, the way you described it, only hardcore voters were voting today, whereas in April, the presidential primary voters are going to be really flooding the ballots.
And I don't know if strategically do they look at that and say, we want to ride the coattails of, is there enthusiasm for in the primaries in the city of Milwaukee to go out and vote for, say, Joe Biden? I don't know. Does that play into the calculus for that? The more people at the polls in the city of Milwaukee, they think the better chance. I don't know. I guess I'm not doing that, but I do wonder if that plays into the strategy of putting it on that date.
Can I jump into the referenda?
Please. Mm-hmm.
Okay. I was a pedantic professor, and when I used to grade term papers, if somebody did further instead of farther, I would mark it. I'd say it's farther if you can measure it. It's further if it's an abstract concept. But now, looking back on what I tortured my students with, I was wrong, because usage is what controls American English versus British English. And so if we want to say referendums because it makes sense, instead of referenda, which apparently is Latin. I didn't take Latin. I'm Jewish. I think we should permit referendums.
We will have a side segment from now on called the Referendum-dums as we do our analysis on this.
This is going to be great. We're going to get people feedback talking about the Latin scholars messaging us and saying you all are wrong.
Okay. So it's not a major election night tonight. Obviously, there's not a ton on the ballot. There are some things on that. What are you watching tonight most closely?
Well, to me, what's interesting is how many election deserts there are. In other words, the way Jason was talking about, depending on which municipality you lived in or what ward of the municipality, you had interesting things to vote on, or you had one tiny thing to vote on. You weren't sure if you'd vote.
Or like all 3 of us, Amanda was here, all 3 of us, we had nothing.
Exactly.
Nothing on the ballot.
Same here. And I think it's disorienting to the voters, because if we want civic participation, if we want maximum participation, we've got to figure out a way that if we've so gotten the voters used to voting that they're disappointed if they can't vote. Probably the key to understanding what's going on today is that it's a pretty clean and clear system. In other words, if two people are running for the same seat, you don't need a primary. And April is just the April election between the two candidates. If you have more than two candidates running for the same seat, then you do a primary. And what's nice about the system is that if we believe in majority rule, in other words, we believe that the person who holds elected office should be the preference of the majority. This is a clean system. 3 candidates today, 1 gets shaved off tonight, 2 face each other in April, and inevitably, because there are only 2 candidates in April, somebody's going to get a majority vote. And so it's like having a runoff in April. And I really like this concept of runoffs because there are a lot of elections in Wisconsin where a person who gets a plurality, in other words, more votes than anybody else, is the person who wins that election. The way we have an April election with only 2 candidates, it's truly a runoff, and somebody's going to be the choice of the majority.
Well, it does give you the opportunity for someone who might support a candidate who doesn't end up in those final 2, but they take a shot at that and they go, okay, well, now that it's down to these 2, now I'm going to throw my support behind candidate A or candidate B. So you sort of get a second chance if your candidate didn't make it there.
That's a great comment. And in some other jurisdictions, not in Wisconsin, they do, I guess you'd call it an instant runoff. It's called second choice voting. For example, in New York City, they have a primary for mayor. So a person casts, I want to vote for so-and-so. And then they go exactly through what you're describing. But if so-and-so, my favorite, weren't on the ballot, then my second choice is, and they mark the ballot. And so they can go through second choice, third choice, fourth choice. And that's a way to guarantee that whoever wins truly is the choice of the majority, but it saves the time of having to vote twice.
I was going to say, is that more efficient than having a night like tonight when you've got to have all the people staffing all of these polling places for very few races, and maybe in many cases to narrow down 3 to 2, and then you've got to have a whole other election in a couple of months?
That's a great point. I think you've really nailed it in the sense of the oddity of today. There are other trends going on. Some incumbents are challenged, or sometimes people don't, there aren't that many candidates. But it really would have saved the voters if today we had not had a primary, and if in April we had second choice voting. So there would be like the instant primary.
Is there and I haven't studied second choice voting to know the strategic sort of thoughts behind that, but are there proponents and opponents, and what are the sort of pros and cons of that method of voting?
Okay, here I'm going to become the professor. It turns out that Wisconsin had second choice voting in 1910, 1911. And that was because the La Follette progressives wanted to be sure that whoever won the Republican primary, after all, the La Follettes were Republicans, but so were they were called the stalwarts, the businessmen, the country club men of Milwaukee. And so you always had showdowns in primaries in a Republican primary. So what the progressives wanted to do is they wanted to be sure that they would win a primary. So if you had a primary with 2 progressives and 1 stalwart, with second choice voting, exactly the way you described it, Bryan, somebody who's a progressive would go into the ballot. They'd say, Joe Blow is my preference. But if Joe Blow gets the least amount of votes, then my second choice is Jane Doe, who's also a progressive. And that was what led to it happening. And then, believe it or not, the stalwarts proceeded to win the legislature and win the governorship. What was the first thing they did? They abolished second choice voting. So Wisconsin hasn't had second choice voting for a long time, and it didn't last very long. But this is a pretty common suggestion. It's not always called second choice voting. Sometimes it's called instant runoffs. Sometimes it's called a final 5. There are different ways to describe it, but the key is so that the voter gets to express their opinion of, if so-and-so gets shaved off, here's who I would have voted for.
Does that minimize the impact of the spoiler candidate? Because we hear a lot about that in presidential elections and gubernatorial elections, the candidate who comes in and maybe gets 3 or 4% of the vote, but it's enough to swing a very tight race.
Oh, you so nailed it. In other words, presidential election in Wisconsin, 49% of the people vote for either Biden or Trump, 48% vote for either Biden or Trump. What happened to the rest? 2 or 3% for a libertarian, 2 or 3% for a Green Party candidate. And so they're sort of spoilers. If a conservative voter votes for the Libertarian but is told through this dynamic of second choice voting, okay, if the Libertarian weren't on the ballot, would you have voted for, let's say, President Trump, should he win the nomination? Then we're eliminating the impact of a spoiler running, because eventually it gets down to 2 people.
Does that discourage some of those third-party candidates from running? Or is it just, I guess I'm just thinking strategically about that. Does that discourage them, or in some ways maybe encourage them that they know that they're not going to get in and spoil a candidate that if they had their preference, if it wasn't for me, I would go this way?
That's the exact dynamic. And frankly, I think the positive of having this sort of instant runoff or instant selection with second choice voting is that the Libertarian can run with a clear conscience. The Green Party candidate can run with a clear conscience. I'm not throwing the election. It's not because of me that so-and-so won't be elected president. I'm giving people a chance to say, oh, I really like Libertarians. I really like the Green Party. But simultaneously, should they be shaved off based on second choice voting because nobody got a majority, then the guilt won't be on me that I prevented, let's say, Joe Biden from getting reelected. I prevented, let's say, President Trump from getting a second term.
So it's primary night here. We've got the April election coming up, and that will be the presidential preference primary here in Wisconsin. By the time we get there, I was talking about this earlier, and this is true in Wisconsin every time this comes around, Super Tuesday's long gone. Usually we pretty much know who the nominees are by the time we get to Wisconsin. It's rare we get to Wisconsin and there's a huge question that's still remaining. When you have that situation, what is it that drives voters to still go out and vote in those primaries when it seems all but certain that we know who the candidates are going to be?
Well, there have been times that are late presidential primary because it's after Super Tuesday, and sometimes the de facto nominee is already the presumptive nominee. But there have been times in Wisconsin where the race was still not settled. For example, Donald Trump lost Wisconsin when he first ran for president. I think it was Ted Cruz who won Wisconsin, if I remember correctly. And
I looked at Jason because I know Jason probably.
Yeah, okay.
I think you're right. I think you're right. Yes.
So sometimes we're lucky that we're a late primary. But more often than not, it's exactly the way you described it. The race is over. And it was 15, maybe 20 years ago, Wisconsin experimented with our February nonpartisan primary also being the day of the presidential primary. And that was an attempt to sort of skip ahead, to become more important. And I can't remember all the reasons, but that didn't last more than a couple of cycles. And then we went back to April. In part, I think it was because New Hampshire started screaming and Iowa started screaming and all the traditions of who gets to go in February. So we went back to having an April presidential primary, and sometimes it's just the luck of the draw. Now, if the race isn't settled, people will definitely vote. But even if the race is settled, I think people enjoy the satisfaction of voting in a presidential primary.
What would it take for us to move back to having that February, where February 20th is today, that's our nonpartisan primary for local races. What would it take to move us back to February for the presidential and really have a key role maybe in picking, not only, we always pick the key battleground state for the fall election, general election between the two presidential nominees, but what would it take for us to play that key role in the nominating process of the party nominees in February?
Well, nothing would prevent the state legislature and the governor from passing a law to make today the presidential primary. The key is, would it be permitted by the Republican National Committee and the Democratic National Committee? In other words, would they permit us to slot our way in? Right now, for example, the New Hampshire primary, where there was a Republican primary that day, that was the first primary in the nation. There was a Republican primary that counted, and there was a Democratic primary that didn't count. Why didn't it count? Because the DNC said, no, South Carolina gets to go first. And so we could sort of roll the dice. We could hope to get permission from the Republican Party and or the Democratic Party. So in that respect, it would put us in a much more important role.
Similarly, the Republican National Convention is being hosted here in Milwaukee. It's a huge deal for the city of Milwaukee. But when you get to nominating conventions these days, once again, we know who the candidate's going to be. So for those who, the uninitiated, the people who are casual observers, what's the point of the Republican National Convention and the Democratic National Convention when we pretty much know who's going to be selected?
In the old days, before I was born, in the old days, very few states had primaries. A lot of states would have caucuses or conventions. A lot of states had what were called favorite sons. That's obviously sexist, but it was sort of a way to hold the delegates until later. And so the convention was a decision-making place. There were conventions 100 years ago that would go into 30, 40, 50 ballots before somebody got the required number of votes. The last time in modern American history when there was no presumptive nominee going into the DNC or the RNC was 1960, the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Going into the first ballot, Kennedy was known to be ahead, but he didn't have all the votes. And everybody thought it would go into a second vote. Maybe Johnson would pick up, maybe Symington would pick up. And so they got to Wyoming, literally the last state. And the Kennedy campaign had made a deal with the chair of the Wyoming delegation saying, we know that you're split between Kennedy delegates and other delegates, but if Wyoming would put us over the top, would you promise to give us the unanimous vote of all the Wyoming delegates? And unbelievably, that was the moment. And that's how Kennedy got the nomination. And so that was the last time there was a real convention. Now that just about every state has a primary, I don't see why we have these conventions.
Is there still okay?
Because I was there in 2016, so there still is drama that takes place at these conventions. I was there in 2016 for both Republicans and Democratic conventions, and we did see there was some shenanigans behind the scenes where you saw some of the supporters of Ted Cruz trying to somehow wheel and deal, but nothing happened. Of course, Donald Trump won that nomination in 2016, and the pro-Cruz people really were kind of silenced on the floor there. But there were sort of shenanigans that were taking place at some of these conventions, and I remember being at the Democratic convention, and of course Hillary Clinton won it in 2016, but there was still heckling from Bernie. Even during the opening prayer, Bernie Sanders supporters had heckled the person praying because they had mentioned Hillary Clinton. So there was still some drama taking place, even if it was maybe not didn't actually switch any of the nomination process.
But I think even with your example, Donald Trump had the votes going into the convention. Hillary had the votes going into the convention. You're describing political machinations that had the weight of a feather. So I'm just really not sure that's a justification for, what, $50 million in Milwaukee?
So then is it really more about just building up enthusiasm? And we hear the discussion that it's a place where the platform will be set. I mean, I think in a lot of ways that's already taken care of too. But does it become more of a cheerleader event where you're trying to get that bump? And that's where obviously the location of the Republican convention being in Wisconsin as a battleground state is the hope that will provide some kind of bump. And is that really what this becomes more of, is sort of a rah-rah event rather than something where there's actually something of substance decided?
That's the perfect example, and that's the only reason for the convention. It's essentially a 4-day commercial for that party, and they're trying to put their best foot forward. And I think what happened in Milwaukee 4 years ago when it became a TV convention is really what the conventions are. They're all TV conventions. They're all intended to give a little sexiness, a little pizzazz to the party, to try to, as you say, a kind of a rah-rah cheerleading thing. But ultimately, I really think it's an anachronism. Is that okay to use, anachronism?
Is that Latin?
I don't know if that's Latin, but referendum definitely is. I know people are tuning in to find out about the election results. I just want to
past 8 o'clock. Yeah.
The polls are now officially closed in Wisconsin. So we are waiting for results, and right now we're still waiting for those results to trickle in from all of these precincts across the state and
Can't
across
imagine
the
it'll
region.
take long this time.
Not many races, but we are monitoring them. We will bring those to you live right here once we get some of those results coming in. But right now we're at 0% reporting.
Right, and I think you're right that with so few polling stations needing to be open today and needing to count votes and such a low turnout, which, by the way, is probably going to be a new record. Statewide, it'll probably be less than 250,000. But I think by like 8:40, 8:45. I think sort of the evening's going to be over. That's how fast it's going to come.
Should we place a bet on that one?
Is betting permitted in Wisconsin?
Friendly wager over a cup of coffee?
All I know is we're going to be here until 9 o'clock. So if that's true, we should actually be here, which is rare that we'll still be live when results are in. So if that's what happens, hopefully we'll be able to bring them to you live. And you can see these election results at fox6now.com. Is that right? People can go and you can look at them yourselves as well, follow them live, but we'll be here talking about them for the next 45, 50 minutes. We talked about what's coming. Obviously, the convention is coming, the presidential primary is coming. In terms of tonight, are there any particular races you're watching that you think are interesting? I know that in some of these cases, it's 3 candidates to get down to 2, so we're not exactly looking at electing a mayor or that sort of thing. But are there things that you're keeping an eye on?
Well, I think the school referenda or referendums, whatever you want to call them, are really important because they often fail. You know, there's a chunk of the electorate in each of those school districts. They have kids in school. They have grandkids in school. They really want to be sure the children get a good education. And then there are the people who really have no link to the school district. They're semi-retired or they're empty nesters. And there's some people who sort of tilt to being conservative on taxation and financial issues, almost always find a reason to vote against it. And authentic, that's based on authentic ideological values that, government is getting too big, taxes are going too high, we've got to put our foot down, we've got to stop this from happening. There are plenty of school referenda that fail, and that's why, for example, we sometimes see a second effort or a third effort. So tonight, I'm really going to be watching, did all 3 pass, did all 3 fail, or what was the breakdown?
You know, Mordecai, one of the first conversations we ever had was in 2020 when I was just new to Milwaukee, and we talked about the lack of people running for office. And when we look at these races, for example, Alderman Michael Murphy was on the show right before you, and we were talking. There's only 2 people running for his seat. He's been in office for 35 years. This was an opportunity for anybody, community leader. Anybody could have had this opportunity to run. They may have had a good shot at actually winning in an open seat after 35 years incumbency. And there's only 2 people running, so there's not even a primary tonight. It'll be on the April ballot. You were talking about that back in 2020. You were worried that so many people were not running and that there's not really a lot of competition at these local races. What do you make of Milwaukee's election tonight, where there's many of these aldermanic seats that don't even have a primary tonight?
Don't even have a primary, and the incumbent running for re-election doesn't even have an opponent in April, unbelievably. I think something is going on, and I don't remember what answer I gave you back in 2020, but whatever it was, I'll repudiate it. No, I think it's sort of intimidating to run for office, partly because of incumbent advantage, partly because it looks sort of scary. You have to go door to door and get signatures on nomination papers. The signatures can be challenged because maybe the address wasn't filled out. You sort of think you need big money to run, although I don't think it's true running for alderman or county board that you need big money. But I think it's scary to people, and there's an element of American political culture that's just so negative about politicians. You know, we'd like to think that people understand that it's civic participation, it's a sense of satisfaction, it's a sense of public service. But somehow I think that gets drowned out with the negativity and the fear about it. And so even though it's theoretically an open system, there should have been 10 people running for Murphy's seat, a dozen people running. Instead, here we're down to so few. It's very surprising.
I thought it was interesting what you just said about the negativity. When Alderman Murphy was on, he ended the discussion by saying, I just want to remind people it's an honorable position, that there is honor in doing this and in serving the community, but there's so much negativity that surrounds it. I wonder how many people actually think of politicians, even at the local level, and think honor or honorable. That's not a word we often hear associated with anyone in elected office these days.
You know, sometimes you go to a ball game and they introduce some VIPs at the beginning of the game, or somebody throws out the honorary curveball, and so the announcer says to the audience, and here is alderperson so-and-so. And what do most of the people in the audience do? Boo. They don't even know who the person is, but it's exactly the way you described it, Bryan.
That's happening now when you say there's a local journalist showing up too. The boos are probably a little bit louder. That is certainly the case. But I do think that is interesting when you talk about. I look at the District 10 seat where there is not a primary. One of those people is someone who has run repeatedly against Alderman Murphy and not really had any kind of a close challenge. Then you have one other candidate in that race. There are others with maybe 3 or 4, but this is happening at a time where there is a lot of turnover on the Milwaukee Common Council. I mean, we just talked about 4 years ago, if you go back to just before the spring election in 2020, and then you go to fast forward to right after this April election, there will be 11 different members of the Common Council out of the 15. Only 4 will still remain. That's a lot of change. It's also a lot of loss of institutional knowledge and what has gone on in the city for however many years. I know there are pluses and minuses to that because there are some who look at that and say, that's fresh ideas, that's fresh faces, people who especially who favor term limits. But for those who really liked having Michael Murphy around for 35 years and they know who their alderman is and he's very responsive, whatever it is, that can be disorienting. What do you make of that turnover on the Milwaukee Common Council?
Well, I think to a certain extent, just plain age. You know, people age out. They're ready to retire. They're ready to do something else. Being an alder, I think, is people are yelling at you. People are complaining to you. You're held responsible for the sanitation workers being too noisy, too early in the morning. I mean, whatever it might be. So I'm not sure there's as much satisfaction as maybe some other positions that are more sort of public policy oriented as opposed to service oriented. But I've got to tell you, parallel to that, what really surprises me is that for the people who do make the effort to get on the ballot and then get on the ballot, some of them don't seem to have the basic understanding of what it takes to run a successful campaign. Do you have a mailing list? Do you have a call list? Do you have a contact list? Have you hit up all your friends for a minor donation? Have you renewed acquaintances with your old high school buddies? I mean, whatever it might be. Some people just don't even have the basic elementary knowledge of what the difference between getting your name on the ballot and being a serious candidate. And so I think today's process, to a certain extent, is going to weed out the people who don't quite have gotten it together yet.
I thought it was also interesting that something that Alderman Murphy said was he wasn't so worried about institutional knowledge because of so many of the people in the bureaucracy who have that institutional knowledge. Does that also, when you've got a lot of young politicians coming in who have little experience and are new to the position, does that sort of swing some of the power to those who aren't in elected positions but have been around a while and know how things work?
That's a great point. And in fact, my area in political science is public administration. In other words, the running of the government, the management of the government, as opposed to the politics of getting elected. And I think it's good that we have specialists. We have a civil service system that, regardless of the election results, these experts are in place. And the alderman might be left of center, the alderperson might be right of center, but the civil servant is there. And the civil servant is supposed to give them neutral, competent, expert advice, and then they can vote on it. And so I think there are a lot of benefits to the way you described it of a civil service system.
I know we've got probably the biggest race of the night in terms of the most candidates for Kenosha mayor, 9 candidates in that one race, and that's going to be whittled down to 2. But we talked earlier, this is one of those where you will have 7 candidates who drop off after this primary. Many people may have no idea who any of them were because it's just hard to get much attention this early with a race of that many candidates. How do you, or is that just, that's kind of the way the system works, is we're going to have 2 that come out of this and they'll be the ones who are going to replace a longtime mayor in John Naramian.
You know, I think to a certain extent the times are better now than they were, say, 20 years ago. It's hard to remember what it was like before being able to go online. In other words, you get a mailer from somebody who's running for Kenosha mayor. You've never heard of them. You go online, you find out what's been the news coverage of them in the past couple of years, if maybe they were on the board, the Common Council. You find their website, you look at their positions, because a lot of the mailers that one gets nowadays are very bland. I'm for lower taxes, I'm for innovation, I'm for public service. It doesn't tell you much. To a certain extent, it's almost like there's a benefit to having partisan elections, because at least if somebody is running as a Republican or somebody is running as a Democrat or a third party, you've got a sense of what their ideological values are, where they are on the political spectrum. When you have nonpartisan elections, you got nothing. And that's why really the citizen has the advantage of being able to go online and get that information.
So I know, Jason, you're our political reporter, so years like this, I'm sure you're going to be going crazy with story ideas. Jason's the guy who comes to our morning meeting, and he will rattle off 15 story ideas because he's on top of everything, and there's only one Jason, so we can't have him cover. I wonder for you, when we're in an election year like this, where this year we've got the spring election coming, the RNC, and then we've got the general election, the presidential election in the fall. Is this like, the Super Bowl for you, years like this?
This is as good as it gets. I mean, really, it's just a fabulous time to be watching politics. Now, clearly, there's a funk amongst the electorate. People are down on politics. They're down on this president. They're down on the former president. There's a lot of negativity. But still, democracy is so exciting. And it's really true that every person's vote matters. And in fact, I wouldn't be surprised if tonight, with the low turnout, we're going to have somebody winning their election by one vote. And if somebody opted not to vote today in, Burlington, they're going to say, why didn't I vote? Yeah. I could have controlled the result of that election. And so that's why every vote does count.
Or a candidate who says, why didn't I knock on one more door? Right?
Exactly. Perfect.
And it's happened. I mean, we've had this recently where we've had recounts. We've had close elections that have been decided by one vote, and they're really exciting because then you go there for the possible recount if the candidate if that happens, and they're just.
We're watching I'm refreshing the numbers, and okay, so I see you've got the Waterford bond referendum is up right now. It shows 100% voting no. But that's because there are 2 votes in that have been counted so far. So just what you were talking about, Mordecai, and now obviously those numbers will go up. It says 15% of precincts reporting, and they have 2 votes in. They are both no votes. If there was ever an election where your vote counts, this is the one, right?
Absolutely. That's a perfect point.
And that's all I'm seeing so far. I'm kind of scrolling through to see what else is updating. Yeah. Sarah, is that the only one you're seeing that even has a result right now? Is the first 2 votes in Waterford?
Yeah, these 2 Waterford ones are separated. One into the 77.8 million, and one's got the 14.16 million. So here is.
And they both have 2 no votes on them, and nothing else is coming in just yet. So it's 8:23. We're going to be on the air for another 37 minutes. Maybe it won't be as fast as we think, or maybe they're all going to come flooding in the next 20 minutes, which may well be the case. But I have to admit, I've never been on an election night where we got our first returns and there were 2 votes total. That's what we have right now.
Mordecai, I want to look ahead. Here we are waiting for these results for tonight to come in. I want to look ahead to April when we have our presidential preference primary. We'll have the Democrats, we'll have Republicans picking, I'm assuming, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. That's what seems like it's going to be. But when you look at the Marquette poll and you throw in the third-party candidates for a general election matchup in the fall, Donald Trump tends to carry the state, according to this latest Marquette poll. What do you make of the third-party candidates, and are they going to be the upset maker here in Wisconsin this year, do you think?
It can cut both ways. You can have third-party candidates who take away votes from Democrats. You can have a third-party candidate who takes away votes from Republicans. And I think it sort of evens out, generally speaking, or that the electorate figures it out. That they, all September, all October, they say to themselves, I'm voting for the Libertarian, or I'm voting for the... And then they walk in to vote in November and they say, I don't want to throw my vote away. I'm going to vote for, let's say, Trump or Biden. So I think there's a bit of an internal dynamic that will eventually go in that direction.
So right now, according to that Marquette poll, when you just do a head-to-head Trump versus Biden, they were tied. But then when you threw in the third parties, then according to this latest poll from Marquette, then Trump actually took the lead by 3 percentage points.
I think it's important that the U.S. Senator from West Virginia, Joe Manchin, decided not to run on, I think it's called the no labels third party, because he's, as a conservative Democrat, he would have attracted conservative Democratic votes. And so I don't think he would have hurt Trump. I think he would have hurt Biden. Now, if Robert Kennedy gets on the ballot and has a substantial following, I think we can presume that he takes away votes from Democrats as opposed to Republicans.
That comes back to the discussion we had earlier about the potential, the idea of the concept of second choice voting,
right?
Where that wouldn't have that impact, but because we don't have that, those third party candidates can make a big difference, especially in states like Wisconsin, where we know things come down to the wire. They're razor thin margins. It doesn't take much to swing a state like Wisconsin.
You know, it's just unbelievable that our last two presidential elections weren't decided by 5% or 3% or 1%. They were decided by 20,000 votes. It was a fraction of a percent. I mean, this is just astounding that you have, let's say, 2.5 million votes cast and somebody wins. Either Trump won 8 years ago or Biden won 4 years ago. Won by a fraction of a percent. I mean, it's just astonishing how important every vote is.
Hey guys, we do have that Marquette law poll package.
Okay.
So why don't we run that and then
yeah.
Mordecai can see that too.
So this was a story we did the day that the Marquette poll came out, and we went and wanted to talk to voters about what issues were most important and what was on their minds. We went to a barber shop on the north side of Milwaukee, so take a listen.
In a state that's used to razor-close elections,
it's going to be interesting to see the outcome of this one.
A likely 2020 rematch is coming at a fast clip.
I think it may go the other way this time.
Really?
Yeah.
Why is that?
I don't know. Something Trump doing. He got a strong supporting group behind him.
The latest Marquette Law School poll finds Donald Trump and Joe Biden again tied among Wisconsin's registered voters.
I'm not excited. I know it's just something you have to do. You got to vote.
At Quez Creations Barbershop on the north side, people are willing to stick their necks out on politics.
Trump or Biden for you personally right now?
I'm up in the air.
I'm voting for Joe.
The number of people voting in Milwaukee County took a sharp cut after 2012 when President Barack Obama was last on the ballot. Comparing 2012 with 2020, you saw 33,000 fewer voters.
And that's more than what separated the last two presidential winners from the losers.
It's our constitutional right to the vote. I wanted to exercise my right.
On the issues, the new Marquette poll finds registered Wisconsin voters favor Trump on the economy and immigration, and Biden on health care and abortion.
If they can discuss health care, oh yeah, that's real important for me.
As the city, state, and nation decide who makes the cut. Jason Calvi, Fox 6 News.
So in that story, we heard about those key issues where when Wisconsin voters were asked who's going to do better on this issue, the economy, they went with Donald Trump. With healthcare, they went with Joe Biden. Are those two issues, again, where do you think those two are going to play out with voters making their decision this fall?
You know, flip a coin and you've got an answer. In other words, it's just so unknowable. Because indeed, they were authentically saying, I care about this issue, and that's going to affect who I vote for. On the other hand, you've got plenty of voters who say, I like so-and-so. I don't know why, but I like so-and-so. And then you've got some elected officials like Barack Obama, who really excites a sliver of the electorate because of the moment of it. Just like Donald Trump right now has a hold on certain voters that it's almost unfathomable. It's hard for people on the outside to understand how much they love him. But they love Trump as much as certain voters loved Obama.
I do think about the idea that, you know, the Kansas City Chiefs had a rematch with the San Francisco 49ers in the Super Bowl. And some people say, I'm sick of seeing these teams. But for some, they just love the rematch. I might hate both teams, but they love the rematch. So many people say they hate Trump, they hate Biden, these are awful candidates. Why are these our choices? And yet it's the rematch. There is something to be said for just the rematch, isn't there?
You know, I think the importance of a rematch is that it gets to undo history. In other words, rematch between between two teams, and one side won, and the opponent coming back for the rematch says, we're going to change history. We're going to change the way things are going. We're going to prove that we should have won last time around because we're going to win this time around. So there are a lot of benefits to a rematch.
Well, Mordecai Lee, thank you again for spending so much time with us today. And I know you'll be back again in April, and we'll be talking to you in the fall. We'll talk to you a lot more between now and then, obviously. But thanks a lot for your time with us here tonight on digital platforms. Good to see you.
Thanks so much, Mordecai.
We'll bring Amanda back in, but we're already starting to see some results come in, and Milwaukee in particular has got 75% of precincts reporting right now, and I think if we've got the slide up there, for mayor, incumbent Mayor Cavalier Johnson with a strong lead there. Obviously, we're going to come away with two candidates that will be around for the April election, and right now the second candidate, at least in terms of numbers, appears to be David King. With 25% of precincts left, it's still possible Aisha Griffin could eclipse him, but it looks like it would be Cavalier Johnson and David King squaring off in April.
And when we look at their backgrounds there, David King ran for lieutenant governor on the Republican side, so he's maybe attracting some of the conservative voters here in the city of Milwaukee. You see Aisha Griffin, she's a community activist. She's only right now with 75% reporting, 4%. So again, this is a mayoral race. We've got Cavalier Johnson running here for his first full term. He won the special election.
For some saying, didn't we just vote for mayor?
Right.
Yes, he did, but it
he
was
completed
not a full
the term of Tom Barrett, who was appointed by President Joe Biden to be the ambassador to Luxembourg, and that meant he had to resign his position as mayor. He can't be mayor and ambassador at the same time. It goes against
Those
many.
are two positions you cannot hold at the same time.
The State Department would not be very happy if their ambassador was also full-time mayor in Milwaukee. So he had to resign that position. It led to Cavalier Johnson becoming acting mayor because he was the council president at that time, and then he won the special election to finish out Tom Barrett's term, which that term would have ran through April of this year.
I don't know if we have, do we have District, you have District 5. I do want to see District 7 too in a minute if we've got that. But District 5, we can see incumbent Lamont Westmoreland also serving a partial term. This would be his first full term on the Milwaukee Common Council. He has a big lead there. Looks like he will find his way into the April election against most likely Bruce Winter, although look at how small those numbers are. 116 votes for Bruce Winter, 12 votes right now for Stacey Smider, and there's still 37% left to be counted there, but it would look like it would be Westmoreland against Winter coming up in April. If we've got Alderperson District number 7, I don't know if you have that, but as I'm looking up the numbers, this is a really interesting race because we've got 4 candidates and no incumbent. This would be the seat that is currently held by Khalif Rainey. Am I right about that? I think that's correct. I think this is Khalif Rainey's District 7. And there are 4 candidates right now, and look at how close this is among the 4 candidates. Only 2 are going to emerge, and right now you've got Jessica Curry with 234 votes, DeAndre Jackson with 211, and then Randy Jones right after that with 172, and Kenneth Hughes with 170. So this is a really close race. With 37% left, I wouldn't say we could necessarily call it for those top 2, but in the lead right now, Jessica Curry and DeAndre Jackson would be, if these numbers hold, they would be the 2 candidates that go to the April election, but that's a really close race.
Yeah, 40 votes separating number 2 from number 3. Only the top 2 vote getters move on to the general election in April, so we're going to be watching this one very closely tonight as those election results come in from the 7th Aldermanic District.
It's like you were saying before, if there's any night when your vote really counts,
absolutely.
This is the exact kind of election where you're either kicking yourself the next day if you didn't vote, or the candidates are kicking themselves because they did not knock on one more door.
We had one more email,
We had that District 5 results for that was the one currently held. Well, let's look at this one. This one's really
District
interesting
11.
as well.
So this is whose seat? This is Mark Borkowski's seat, right? That he is not running for re-election. So again, no incumbent. And you can see Peter Bergelis right now with the lead, 52%. Josh Zepnick in second. This is Josh Zepnick, former State Assemblyman Josh Zepnick, who went through some turmoil during the Me Too movement, accusations that he had inappropriately touched some staffers, I believe.
Inappropriately. The allegation was kiss, right?
Kiss,
I it was the allegation of kissing. And then he lost his re-election bid after that allegation was, I believe, in 2017. He lost in 2018. And then he did run for county board, I believe, last year, or was it 2022? But he did lose that race for county board, and now he's running for City of Milwaukee Alderman in the 11th district, which is outgoing Alderman Borkowski, leaving that position open for this primary and then the general election come April.
It was interesting earlier when Alderman Murphy, and he caught himself when we were talking about the makeup of council, where he said, well, it means you have a bunch of young kids. And he caught himself nicely there. But it will be interesting to see what the makeup of Common Council looks like, and then what that means as far as perspective goes, because we do have a lot of institutional knowledge going out the door here.
Right, and also, looking at this race between Burgellis and for the 11th district there, Borkowski was really a strong voice from the conservative perspective. And he would bring up conservative issues in the debates on the floor of the chamber and things like that. And that voice goes away after April when he retires from Common Council. Peter Burgellis, member of the county board, is definitely more liberal than outgoing Alderman Borkowski. So we'll see what that means for that district near the south side, or I guess the west side there.
I know you did invite Alderman Borkowski to come on.
Yes.
He said he might be available if we're doing this again, which we will
April.
be in April. Michael Murphy came on, even though he still got some time to serve, and took the tough questions from Amanda.
Well, that's I got to stick with my thing. But I'm also interested in. And we always laugh because we know there are certain members of Common Council who are soundbite machines, right? And I mean, we're talking about Borkowski. I'm interested in seeing too what their individual relationships with journalists and the media will be like, especially in this changing landscape that we're all working with. I know you made a joke earlier about journalists getting booed if we were to go out on the field, right?
Our approval ratings are not as high as they once were.
Our approval ratings are not as high, and sometimes we feel that pushback coming from the politicians. And in this era of social media and people having their own ways to get their message out there, I'm going to be interested to see how Common Council navigates that with this new makeup.
For what it's worth, I'm checking that Waterford referendum. It's still at 2 votes. So
there's just not enough. There's not enough results there to
right
even
now.
Take any insight there with that.
Now we got
total.
some other small races I can just rattle off to you. You can look at all these at fox6now.com in the election results tab. But other than the city of Milwaukee, I think Village of Fox. No, I didn't have any numbers on that one yet. Milwaukee County Supervisor. We have Deanna Alexander, who is the incumbent. And she is in what looks like a dead heat right now with Brandon Williford. But those two, if they both hold, would go on to the general election in April. And Marty Hagedorn right now with 15% of the vote there. That is with, it looks like, if my eyes, my old eyes tell me right, I think it's 68% of the precincts reporting. Is that right? Yeah, that's what that looks like. Okay. Oh yeah, you've got me up on the screen. Okay, so you guys can see that now. All right. Okay. So Deanna Alexander. So if you look at how close that is, I mean, that could be a very tight race for supervisor.
Yes.
Come April. No question where. No idea right now where Marty Hagedorn's votes would go if he's the one that drops off. But anyway, a close race there right now.
Well, we were talking before about what an alderman does, what an alderperson does. Jason, for the person watching this who maybe doesn't know what their county supervisor does, walk us through those responsibilities, the county supervisor compared to the city alderperson.
Yeah, so again, I mean, in both roles, we're talking about your tax money at work. So with the county government, we're talking about things, for example, the Milwaukee County Zoo. So we're talking about funding for the Milwaukee County Zoo. We're talking about transportation funding for Milwaukee County Transit, right? So that was one area where in the past few years before this new sales tax came into play and more shared revenue, that was a place where Milwaukee County would make cuts. When you look at this last budget cycle, the county actually was able to increase some of the routes. In the past, they were cutting because of these potential budget crisis looming. They made cuts to transit, and this year they actually added back some of the routes. So that's one of those places where they're investing your tax money at the local level into transportation, into the zoo. We're talking about the Milwaukee County Jail. We're talking about security on the roads. We're talking about the deputies who patrol the interstates, as well as security at the airport as well.
And if the future is collaboration, then who advances and who wins these seats is going to be a big deal. If there is collaboration to be had down the road to avoid some of those budget shortfalls we were talking about earlier.
To continue with the theme of this being one of those election nights where your vote really makes a difference, this is another small race, but if you want to pull me back up on the screen here, Ozaukee County Supervisor, District 17. I just find this fascinating because there's 3 candidates, and the only one who's looking to get dropped off right now is the incumbent, David Irish, with 71 votes. You've got Peter Eisenhower and Jack Arnett and that says with 100% of the precincts reporting. It's a small race. I don't know anything about any of these candidates, but it's really interesting that we've got fewer than 400 votes between those three candidates, you fill a few school buses with the people who showed up at the polls today in that district, and the incumbent looks like won't even make it to the general election. So this is one of those nights where it doesn't take much for your vote has a lot of weight. Let's put it that way.
Do you want to look at Kenosha Mayor? We have the top
we do.
four
Oh
getters
yes,
so
let's
far.
do that. Okay.
So this is Kenosha Mayor. The long-serving mayor there is not running for re-election. So you've got at the top there, we've got 52% of the precincts reporting, and we've got David Bogdala with 40%. He has been an alderman there in the city for 16 years. So he has a little bit of name recognition there, and he's leading the pack of 9 people running for Kenosha Mayor. There's all 9. We actually had to squeeze their pictures really tightly to get them all on one page. And number 2, according to these results so far, is Lydia Spotswood. She's actually on the Plan Commission. She's a member of the City Plan Commission in Kenosha. She's been involved with local politics for a while. So again, she has some name recognition. She's polling 27% there. The other alderman there, Kelly McKay, he's only been on the council since 2022, and he's getting about 10% of the votes, according to what we've seen with 50% of the precincts reporting.
You know, what really stands out to me is what Mordecai said a few minutes ago, too. He said, especially when you have so many of these candidates who are new and don't have a lot of experience, they might have done enough to get themselves on the ballot, but do they know how to sort of set up the machine? Do they know how to get those call lists? Do they know what to do to, boots on the ground to get? You've got the top 2 there have experience, at least some experience in local politics, and maybe significant experience compared to some of the other candidates. And there they are, the top 2 vote getters right now. In an election where we're talking about a couple of thousand votes, that goes a long way.
Well, and it's all about name recognition, right? So in a race where you don't have the easy, okay, they fall in this category or that category, I really identified with what Mordecai was saying about the mailers being so vague, because, we got some, last election cycle, we got some to our house for school board. There was a big school board race, and every flyer said, this candidate is for children's education. I hope so, if you're running for school board. That doesn't tell me a whole lot about you. So you think about the average voter and the work they have to do to figure out where each person is on the issues. For them to watch the candidate forum that you watched, Bryan, is a considerable investment in time, and you still don't exactly know where everyone is. So that's where that name recognition, and we're seeing it play out right here, really comes into play.
I want to see if we could pull up. Do you have the Burlington Schools
I do.
referendum?
Yep,
okay. Because that's with about 42%. So there's a long way to go, but look how tight that is. 2,000 votes on each side. And right now the no votes have it just barely. But that is the other referendum we're talking about, Waterford school referendum. 2 votes in, both no. Here you've got a very slight lead for the no's in Burlington, with a lot more of those votes that are in. But I know that's one that Mordecai said he wants to watch very closely, because if all 3 of these go down, all 3 of the school referendums, I'll say referenda because you're here.
Just referenda.
So the 3 referenda, if they all go down, is that a sign of what's to come for other school issues like this? And obviously MPS watching closely, because they've got a big one on the ballot.
And
April.
The voter turnout's going to be a lot smaller today than it's going to be in April, because we have a presidential primary in April, so the turnout's going to be more. People are going to be a lot fired up for that. I want to pull up Milwaukee Mayor if we can, because we have 92% of the precincts reporting right now, and it looks like definitely.
Stand by. Oh yeah, we got some check.
Let's pull that up. But it looks
no, wrong thing.
It looks like Cavalier Johnson's taking the lead on this one. He's got enough votes there. Really, I mean, look at that. Can somebody do the quick math on that? 11,000, and then
we're journalists. We don't do math.
It's statistically clearly enough of lead, but again, it doesn't matter in terms of Cavalier Johnson. 2 are going forward. Yeah. So even though
Sarah's
the check mark is by
laughing
Cavalier
at us.
Johnson's name, it doesn't mean he's been reelected mayor. He's got to be reelected in April. It looks like his opponent will be David King.
He's got some strong support there, and he'll be facing off against a Republican who ran for Lieutenant Governor, David King, who's a businessman. He's also a minister. He does some nonprofit work in the Milwaukee area. But again, Cavalier Johnson, 83% of this primary night, with 92% of the precincts reporting tonight.
To your earlier point, Jason, with some of these positions, once you're in, you could be there for quite a long time. That's where the term mayor for life comes from.
Yeah, and that's what we've seen in the past with our mayors here serving for so long, Tom Barrett and the others before him. So Cavalier Johnson. We'll see where he goes from here, but he is looking pretty good tonight on this primary night.
Going back to District 5, Milwaukee alderperson, and we've got, with 96% of the precincts reporting, a closer race now between 2 and 3, but as it gets closer to the top, it looks like Bruce Winter may squeak this one out and face off against Lamont Westmoreland, the incumbent in District 5.
And if you're having deja vu, I mean, Lamont Westmoreland had to run for the seat. There was a special election last year when Alderwoman Dodd had abruptly resigned, and he ran in the spring of last year. And so he's only been in office for, I don't even believe it's been a year since he was sworn in to take this role, and now he's got to run again. And this is just primary night. He's looking really good with those numbers tonight, but then the general election will be in April for that race as well.
If we go back to City of Milwaukee alderperson district number 7, still no check marks here, but you can see that the top two, Jessica Curry and DeAndre Jackson, are widening the lead just slightly. But gosh, look at those numbers. They're all in the 200s. All 4 candidates have votes that are in the 200s. From top to bottom, the difference is literally 56 votes from the first to fourth place. The top 2 will move on. At the moment, it looks like Curry and Jackson, but there's still 16% of precincts to come in on that. So, who knows if maybe they just hit the right neighborhood and Randy Jones hits a home run or Kenneth Hughes does. But right now, very close race, but it looks like the top 2 would be Curry and Jackson. Similar numbers as before in Aldermanic District 11. I think we're still at 63% there, so that hasn't moved anywhere.
It looks like we have a few other races that have been called, Village of Fox Point trustee. We've got a Dodge County supervisor one. So as predicted, these are all coming in relatively quickly.
Village of Fox Point trustee, I just have to feel for Kevin Hartlip because there are 2 seats and 5 candidates. So 4 candidates move forward for the 2 seats. And Kevin looks like the odd man out there at the bottom of that one. So you've got David Miller, Mark Friedman, Max Berry, and Paul, I don't know if that's Kretschel. That's my guess on pronunciation, who look like they've all got the check marks, look like they will be the ones who are moving forward for one of the 2 seats on the Fox Point Village Board.
Oh, wow.
Oh, Waterford's
okay, so
jumped up to 100%
Waterford
now. So let's
Please
take a look
tell me
at
it's more than 2 votes. Okay.
I sure hope it is.
Well, look at that. Wow.
Waterford looks like it has shot down. Is this both, or is that...
This is 77.8.
The 77.8.
So the 77.8 is for the inside of the building, leaking pipes, tearing down an old building there. They were going to rebuild that building. And again, those results, if we could pull them back up, it is...
The other one.
Yeah, shot down by
a few percent at least,
with a 10 percentage point people voting against it there.
And
this is for the outside. This is for the athletic facilities.
An even stronger rebuke of the athletic facilities referendum.
Wow.
61% to 39%. A significant difference between the two. So it does look like there were certainly a substantial number of people who went to the polls and said, I can support the money
Fixing
for the boiler
pipes,
and the
right.
leaky pipes. Not for athletic facilities, but both go down. And that was you said the 3rd try there?
This is the 3rd try for referendum in the Waterford. That's the Waterford Union High School district. And they've tried this. This is the 3rd attempt. So 3rd time was not a charm for them down there. This was also the largest. So in the last one, which was 1 year ago, 2023 in April, the referendum there was $24 million. This time they went $91 million. And they were hoping that the deal was, hey, if you pass this referendum tonight, then they would not go ask for any more raises in property taxes for referendum over the course of the next 12 years, and the voters there shot it down, which means, guess what, guys? We're probably going to have to do stories about this again, I bet, next year as well.
Jason writes down his story pitches for tomorrow. That was my next question, was what happens next? Because I'd imagine... from their perspective, they're going to say, well, this problem isn't going away, right? It's going to continue to snowball. Mm-hmm. So does it just keep coming up year after year? What do they do in the meantime?
Well, that's what we asked the superintendent, and yeah, it means that they're probably going to have to go back to referendum again and ask people again and make that pitch. They were hoping to have the last year to again reemphasize what was at stake here with all of the, and they gave tours to the community. They opened it up. We showed people in the video kind of a little bit of that tour showing these leaking pipes that just burst all over the place from pipes that are dating back to 1950s. If you've ever dealt with that in your home, you know.
Isn't it amazing though how you suddenly get tours of places you would never see when they need? I think about the tours you did of American Family Field. You were seeing parts of American Family Field we would never see, but they're saying, "Hey, we need a bunch of money to fix these things." Right. All of a sudden, you get to see the inner workings. Didn't work in this case.
Didn't work in this case. They did the tours. They had public meetings. I was at the last public meeting before the vote, and it was at the library, and there was probably 5 or 6 people there. So people may have already made up their mind the last 2 years, and they've said, I don't need to go hear it again, but this was their last attempt. Now they're going to have to try again, I guess, potentially next year. We'll see what happens there in Waterford Union. But I know in some of these other districts that had referendum tonight, I don't know if we have any results from. We do. Here we are with Burlington. Take a look at that.
Burlington, I think that's still at 42%.
Yeah.
So this is where we were before.
It's close.
It's, our percentage point, we're literally 49 votes separating the no's and the yeses, but right now the no's have it. But a lot more to be counted there. So that one, I don't think we can count on those numbers just yet. There's a ways to go. Mordecai was sitting here, he talked about, he said somewhere tonight there's going to be somebody who wins by a vote. And I'm watching, I'm just looking for that. And it's going to be a small race.
That will also be a Jason follow-up story.
Hartford Joint 1 School Board. There are 2 seats. There are 5 candidates. And I've done stories in that district. This is one that there was some controversy there over the superintendent and his role and the potential of the hiring of his wife to the district using pandemic relief funds. Here, there is the incumbent who right now has a lead with 17 votes. There's only 23% reported,
Not
but literally
leading by 17 votes.
Has 17
has
votes.
17 votes.
The second, and now four of these candidates will go forward. That's why I think it's interesting right now. Ian Gronbeck is the odd man out with 1 vote less.
But he's only separated by,
Right, he's only but with 23%, Ian's got a shot. So there's still more to be decided in Hartford Joint 1.
There's the Wilmot School District. This is a referendum there for Wilmot Union. And
also looking like a no.
Looking like a no, 54% voting no right now. This is the second go-around for Wilmot Union. The district also failed in 2023, and then since that failure last year, they've cut 22 jobs from the school district. They're asking for this money to really invest in. They've been putting off what they say routine and preventative maintenance for their buildings, and they've been asking for this money, $7.5 million. And the voters right now, not with all the precincts reporting, but it looks like they're saying no to that referendum. And Wilmot Union again for a second time.
Oh, I keep forgetting that I'm up on the screen. I'm just scrolling because I'm looking at things. So if you're watching at home, you're probably thinking about why is he scrolling through all of this?
I would be interested in seeing, when you're comparing the referenda that have succeeded and that have failed, how much of it was a difference in the demographic makeup, especially when it comes to age of the people voting, how much of it is an effective marketing campaign. I've talked to so many voters who are like, yeah, when my kids were in school here, I always voted yes, and then they left, and now I always vote no. And how does that dynamic play into it? How much of it is really, when a referendum succeeds, how much of it is really, wow, an effective job of winning over the voters with your pitch, and how much of it is just a lot of people here have kids who are still in the school district.
These are great story ideas. I hope our competition isn't jotting these all down because I know they would probably steal these stories. But that's what we need to look at, right?
Is that your nice way of telling me to shut it?
No, just write them down and text them to me.
Okay.
But no, that's
good.
a great point with the demographics, right? How many? What's the demographics in these particular school districts that are right now rejecting, and what does that foretell about what's going to potentially happen in Milwaukee in April when we have another gigantic referendum on the ballot?
This is digital coverage, so I'm sorry that I have to do this, Jason. You've got a piece of fuzz right there on your beard. I didn't want you to. All right, I didn't want.
How long's it been there, folks? Can you
I don't know,
me?
but I just thought I would take care of that before we're off the air. Awesome. We got about 7 minutes to go here, and we're still watching some of these things. When it comes to the referenda, there's only 3, so how much can you read into it? I don't know, but if all 3 go down, as Mordecai said, if you go back just a few years, it didn't matter what community you were in all across the state. 80% or more of these referenda were passing.
You did a story on this,
We did.
didn't you?
There was just an enthusiasm. And at the time, I think, it all comes down to timing. What was on the ballot at the same time as those things, but also what was the sort of economic reality at the time. And if it wasn't, inflation wasn't where it is today. And there hadn't just been, sales tax in the city of Milwaukee that had passed or other things. Who knows what it is that why these things wane and waft. But if these 3 go down, is it a sign that referenda right now are just not having their day, when just a few years ago it was almost a sure thing? It certainly doesn't look like that tonight, as the 3 that are on the ballot in this small spring election are so far looking like they're going to go down. Let's see, what else do we have? Kenosha Mayor, have we got any more? Or are we still, I think that's 94%.
94%.
So it does look like the top two vote getters from earlier are going to be the two that will go forward. David Bogdala and Lydia Spotswood have that lead. Kelly McKay hanging around, but with about 300 votes separating, or a little fewer than 300 votes separating the two in the last 6% of precincts. I don't know with these numbers if Kelly McKay can overcome that. It looks like these would be the 2 out of the 9 candidates that would then face off in the general election in April to replace longtime Kenosha Mayor John Antaramian.
And Jason, remind us of the issues facing the Kenosha mayor as they were coming in, because I know for people who are just joining us, in the story we watched earlier, you were talking to voters about the issues that were crucial to them. You also happened upon a retiring county supervisor. Retiring or retired?
His term runs through April.
Yeah, retiring.
County board supervisor.
Supervisor.
And,
there we go. I had it right.
And he pointed out that there's a couple big issues that, insider knowledge that he has, but one of them is a water treatment plant that they're really going to need to take care of in the next few years. And how do you pay for that? And that's going to be a big challenge for the next mayor of Kenosha. Of course, Kenosha is also looking at bringing a casino to the city. So that's going through federal approval process. The last time we had federal approval of a casino in Wisconsin, it was Beloit. It was a Ho-Chunk that were asking for a casino in Beloit. It took the federal government 10 years. I have the paperwork. It took them 10 years to approve that, and then Governor Evers signed off on it. So are we going to take 10 years? Is the federal government going to take 10 years this time to approve a casino for Kenosha? Seems unlikely because they are trying to ramp up the speed of these approval processes.
Well,
but that's another
track
one.
record, even if they do take 10 years, they might have the same mayor.
Yeah, and exactly, mayor for life, and it's already through the local approval process, so that's not like the next Kenosha mayor, if they were against this, is not going to stop it. But that's another one, is just the revenue from the casino potentially helping the city finances or whatever happens with that, and then looking at just the things that people talked about, potholes and crime, and of course. Yeah.
I thought you had another result. Just Sarah telling us we've got 3 more minutes to keep gabbing here and talking about some of this. I'm looking for updated results. I'm not seeing much more.
Milwaukee County Supervisor. Was that Milwaukee County Supervisor, or was that something else that you scrolled past?
That I just went right up here. Milwaukee County Supervisor, District 18. We do have some check marks there. Deanna Alexander, the incumbent, will be moving on with Brandon Williford. Those numbers are close. That would suggest that this could be a tight race in the general coming in April. But between now and then, who knows what their campaigns do and what kind of a machine they get out, what kind of campaign they run. It could be a very different story come April 2nd, but it looks like those will be the two going forward for that supervisor position. I don't think we've seen much of a change in Milwaukee Alderperson District number 11. District 7 still stuck at 88%, where you've got the top 2 vote getters with just 60 or 70 votes more than numbers 3 and 4. And it looks like Lamont Westmoreland and Bruce Winter is still 4% to go there, but it looks like Bruce Winter will move on. I don't see check marks, but that looks awfully close. Not seeing any other new numbers at the moment. When we do go off the air here, or off digital here in a couple of minutes, you can see all of this at fox6now.com. Look for the election results tab, and you can peruse these for yourself.
And if you tune in right now, starting in just a minute here on Fox 6, please watch us there, because we're going to have the latest updates on our broadcasts on Fox 6. Check us out there, and we'll be live through 10:30.
Yeah,
I want to let you know, by the way,
that continues to go on here through Fox Local. So if you're watching us through Fox Local,
hang around.
You don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah,
you hang
absolutely.
around. Our broadcasts will come to you.
And that's a good chance for us to tease ahead. When April 2nd comes, the presidential preference primary, we will be back here doing the same thing. You can follow us on Fox Local, on Fox 6 YouTube, at fox6now.com. We'll be doing it again, of course, come November for the presidential election. So I'm seeing that's a 1-minute signal. Okay, I didn't know if you were signaling field goal. We're number 1. Okay,
She's
that's
telling
a number
us
1
we're number
signal.
1.
We are number 1. So for those of you who have stuck it out for 2.5 hours, you are political diehards.
Yeah, welcome to Political Geek Night. You can now join the club.
I do see I think we said the Waterford was 100%. Both of those have been shot down. So the Waterford bond referendum, both the $77.8 million interior work and the $14 million athletic facilities referenda have gone down. Burlington is up to 59%. It's a close one, but a few hundred votes going in the no column there. And the Burlington referendum right now, 6% lead for the no's with about 40% of the vote left to go. And again, you can see the rest of the results at fox6now.com. And if you want to stick around for Fox 6 News, you can hang around right here on